This is the last will and testament of me, Adam Sotheran, lately of the Lake House at Hawkshead on Windermere in the county of Westmoreland, written by my own hand in the steady fall of my 71st year on this 14th day of September 1819, in the 7th year of my retirement at this lake. I was born at the curate's house at Kirkland in Westmoreland on the 2nd day of April, 1748, the elder son of the late Reverend Elijah Sotheran and his wife Mrs. Martha Sotheran, née Furness. I was educated at Sedbergh School and at St. John's College, Cambridge. In 1771, I took service with the Honourable East India Company at Leadenhall Street. In 1791, the East Indiaman Brunswick, on which I served as 4th officer, was lost off the Coromandel coast in the spring monsoon, and I was reported drowned. I was not drowned. I was taken by Madras coastal traders, restored by Calcutta merchants, and made my way to Bombay. I returned to the company's service at Calcutta in 1793 under the simple name of Adam Bowness, in which name I served the company in trade matters at Calcutta and Canton until 1810. I returned to England by Falmouth in October 1812 and came home to Windermere in the same year. I have lived these 7 years and 1 month past at the Lake House at Hawkshead under the same simple name, the Sotheran name being known to no one in this country, except the Reverend Geoffrey Goodfellow curate of this parish. I have one surviving kinswoman in the world, Miss Eliza Sotheran, only daughter of my late younger brother, the Reverend John Sotheran, curate of St. Michael's at Kirkland, 1799 to 1816. I have followed her circumstances from a distance these 7 years past, by the candid kindness of the Reverend Goodfellow at the parish post. I give and devise the Lake House at Hawkshead, with the small south slope and lake shore of 78 acres, together with my household goods, the small library of 318 volumes, the East India chest with its papers and the manuscript Sumatra memoir, and the further sum of £6,800 in the 3% consolidated annuities at the Bank of England unto the said Miss Eliza Sotheran, to hold to her heirs and assigns for ever in fee simple absolute. I ask my niece's pardon for the 7 years of my silence. The fault is entirely my own. Witness my hand at the Lake House this 14th day of September 1819. Adam Sotheran. Witnesses: Margaret Greenacre, housekeeper; Geoffrey Goodfellow, curate of St. Michael's at Hawkshead. Mr. Thirkell laid the foolscap level upon the green baize of his writing table. A coal settled in the low grate. Beyond the chamber's 3 sash windows, the cool, clear, pale blue Saturday morning of the 8th of January 1820 stood mild and bright upon the limestone roofs of Strickland Gate. Miss Eliza Sotheran sat in the leather chair opposite him with her gloved hands folded upon the dove-grey wool of her half-mourning lap, the white linen of her collar very clean at her throat. The mild, firm, equable composition of her oval face had not altered through the reading, only the pale blue of her eyes. True cool fell blue, the colour of the lake at the spring close, was a little deeper. She drew one even breath, and a second. "Mr. Thirkell," she said, in the level Westmoreland voice she had used in her schoolroom these 3 years past, "I am obliged to you for reading it through with so much care." The solicitor inclined his thinning, silver-grey head. The gold rims of his spectacles caught the pale window light. He was in his 58th year, a Kendal man of 30 years' practice on the Westmoreland circuit, and he had not, in those 30 years, read out a holograph will more singular than this one. "Miss Sotheran," he said, and his attentive grey eyes met hers above the gold rims. "The document is in its kind, irregular, but in law it is sound. Your great-uncle wrote it out by his own hand, witnessed it at the foot before 2 persons in the parish, Mrs. Greenacre, his housekeeper, and the Reverend Goodfellow, curate of St. Michael's at Hawkshead, and it was admitted to probate at the Carlisle Prerogative Court on the 22nd of December last. There is no further document. There is no codicil. There is no contesting kinsman. You are the sole devise in fee simple absolute. Eliza inclined her dark auburn head, smooth-pinned at the nape. He died on the 17th of November, she said in the even voice. It was not a question. At the lake house, of a long decline in his 71st year. Mrs. Greenacre was with him at the last, and Mr. Furness, his steward, and the Reverend Goodfellow came up from the village a little before evening. It was a settled passing. He had himself written out the will the September before, in a clear forenoon of mild Cumbrian weather, and had handed it to me sealed at this chamber in the first week of October. He knew what he was about. She was silent a moment. Her gloved fingers tightened upon one another by the merest degree, and then settled. You had been his solicitor, sir, these 7 years, since the spring of 1813. He came to Kendal that April by the Ambleside Road, and presented himself at this chamber with a Bank of England draft on the Calcutta House, and a question concerning the purchase of the lake house at Hawkshead. He gave his name as Mr. Adam Bowness. He gave no Southron connection. The freehold was in his possession by the Michaelmas quarter of that year, and from that time forward I had the keeping of his small Westmoreland business, the rents of the home pasture, the parish rates, the small annual disbursements to the school and the church. He was a temperate client. He gave little trouble. And the Southron name, known in this county to one man only, Miss Southron, to the Reverend Goodfellow at the Hawkshead curacy, in confidence, in the first month of his Hawkshead residence, to no other, not to me, not to Mrs. Greenacre, not to Mr. Furness. The country knew him these 7 years as Mr. Adam Bowness, a retired East India gentleman of mild Cumbrian habits, of book-reading and the morning fell walks and the village goodwill. Eliza considered this in the level fell blue gaze, and he disclosed his Southron identity in the will itself. In the will itself, and in the small private letter which lies sealed with it. I have not opened the private letter. It is for your hand only. He drew out, from the gold-fronted drawer of the writing-table, a foolscap packet bound in narrow black ribbon. He laid it before her in the considered Kendal way. The will copy, Miss Southron, engrossed by my clerk in fair italic from the original holograph, which remains at the Carlisle registry. The private letter is at the inner fold, sealed in your great-uncle's wax with his Southron cipher. I have not broken it. She took the packet in her gloved hand. The weight of it was not great. She set it down upon the green baize at her side. And further, Miss Southron, he produced a second paper, this one a single sheet folded once and stamped with the bank's wafer. The Bank of England draft for £6,800 in the 3%, payable upon your endorsement at the Threadneedle Street counter or at the bank's Liverpool agent. The dividends fall due at Lady Day and Michaelmas. I have already given notice at Threadneedle Street that the holder will be your good self from the 8th of January present. She inclined the dark auburn head. The draft she set upon the will packet. Mr. Furness, the steward's address, said Mr. Thurkell, producing a folded card. He is at the home pasture cottage 1/2 mile south of the lake house. He has been at the Southron service these 6 years past, since the Southron pasture was first laid in 1814, and he is a frank Cumbrian man of weathered hazel eye and very settled hand. He will meet you at the south porch upon your arrival. Mrs. Greenacre at the lake house, you have already from the will. A fourth article, a brass ring with a single brass key upon it, laid upon the green baize between them. The East India chest's key. The chest stands in the South Library at the lake house. Mrs. Greenacre has kept the chest these 7 years at your great-uncle's settled instruction. The key was in my keeping from the day after his passing. It is yours now. Eliza took the brass ring up into her gloved palm. The little weight of the key was kind in her hand. She closed her fingers upon it for the length of one even breath, and then laid it gently upon the will packet beside the bank draft. "I am much obliged to you, sir. Miss Sotheran." He folded his attentive hands upon the green baize. "May I take leave to ask your present arrangement at Kendal?" "I am these 3 years at Mrs. Bagshaw's reading school at the parish church house, the mistress of the elementary reading class, the Kendal village girls of 8 or 9 years, in the elementary part. Mrs. Bagshaw had my customary notice in November on your earlier inquiry letter. She has been most kind. I shall finish out my last week at the schoolroom and then go down to the lake." He inclined the silver-grey head. "Saturday next is the 15th. The Ambleside post-chaise leaves the King's Arms at 9:30. The lake house will receive you by 3 of the afternoon. I have written ahead to Mrs. Greenacre by yesterday's mail, in expectation that this would be your settled wish." "It is, sir. I thank you." She was 28 years old. She had been born at Kirkland in Westmoreland in the November of 1791, the only child of the Reverend John Sotheran and his wife, Theodosia née Greystoke, in the modest curate's house by the parish church of St. Michael's at Kirkland. Her mother she had lost to the spring fever in the May of 1810, in her own 18th year, when Theodosia had been but 32. Her father she had lost to a low autumn fever in his 47th year at the Kirkland curacy in October 1816, although she had remembered him afterwards as being only 49, the parsonage Bible giving the longer figure, when she had been 24. After her father's burial in the Kirkland churchyard, she had taken the Kendal post offered by Mrs. Bagshaw, and had been at the parish reading school these 3 years. Of an Uncle Adam she had carried since her 17th summer one Southern sea-tale only, that her father's elder brother Adam had taken the East India service in his early manhood, and had been lost off the Coromandel coast on the East Indiaman Brunswick in the spring monsoon of 1791, 6 months before her own birth. Her father had spoken of him perhaps 4 times in her hearing across her growing years, always in the gentle parsonage tone of an elder brother long given over to the sea. The Sotheran family had received the company's notice of the loss at Kirkland in the early autumn of 1791, and had mourned and had set the matter by. Her father had set it by very deeply. She had not, until the 8th of January present, supposed it set by less than entirely. She rose. Mr. Thirkell rose with her, in the upright Kendal way, and handed her the will packet and the brass key, and the bank draft folded together into the inner pocket of her dove-grey reticule. "Saturday next, Miss Sotheran, the 15th at 3, the lake house. The 15th at 3. I am much obliged." He saw her to the chamber door, and to the head of the panelled stair. She went down into the limestone forenoon of Strickland Gate, with her gloved hand upon the iron rail. The Kendal Market Street stood cool and clear and pale blue at noon. The fell light over the limestone roofs was the very colour of Windermere at the spring close, which she had not seen these 28 years, and which she would see again Saturday next at the 3rd hour. She walked north along Strickland Gate at her even pace, with the reticule and its small packet upon her left wrist and her right gloved hand resting lightly at the dove-grey of her skirt. She did not hurry. The Highgate end of the town she reached in 20 minutes, and turned in at the iron gate of Mrs. Bagshaw's lodging-house. In the upper-floor parlour she let down the bonnet ribbons, set the reticule upon the writing-table by the eastern sash, and gave her travelling cape into the care of the dressing-room peg. The afternoon hour stood at 1:30. The fire in the parlour grate was a low good one. She sat down at the writing table, drew the will packet from the reticule, and broke the small wax seal, a Southern cipher in dark red wax, at the inner fold. The private letter lay within the foolscap of the will copy in 2 paragraphs of careful italic. She read them through. She read them through a second time. To my niece, Miss Eliza Sotheran, the only daughter of my late younger brother John, whom I last saw at Sedberg in the summer of 1789. I have followed your father's curate years, and your own teaching years at the parish post by the candid kindness of the Reverend Goodfellow at this lake. I have not made myself known to you these 7 years past, because I had felt myself, in the long Cumbrian quiet of my Hawkshead retirement, too far gone in the simple Mr. Bowness life to recover the Southern name in your young womanhood. The fault is entirely my own. I commend the lake house to your good keeping. Adam Sotheran, written at the lake house this 14th day of September 1819. She did not weep. She set the letter sober on the writing table. She drew one even breath. She folded the letter once at the central crease. Then she laid it level beside the brass key upon its brass ring. For a little time, she sat very still at the eastern sash, looking out across the limestone Kendal roofs to the pale blue Cumbrian afternoon over the eastern fells. A wood pigeon was crooning at the chimney stack opposite. The fell light moved by the merest degree upon the slates. She drew a third even breath. Then she took up her pen. She wrote 4 letters at the writing table that afternoon, in the firm, clear italic of her schoolroom hand, between the hours of 2 and 4. The first was to Mr. Thirkell at his chambers in Strickland Gate, in 3 even sentences, acknowledging his goodness of the morning, confirming her travel by the Saturday post-chaise of the 15th at 9:30, thanking him for the engrossed will copy, the bank draft, and the brass key. She sealed it with green wax and addressed it for the evening post. The second was to Mrs. Margaret Greenacre at the lake house at Hawkshead on Windermere. She wrote it with a particular gentleness, knowing nothing of Mrs. Greenacre beyond that she had been 7 years in the late Mr. Sotheran's service, and had set her name as the first of the 2 witnesses at the foot of the holograph will. She informed Mrs. Greenacre that she would be at the south door of the lake house by 3 o'clock of the afternoon of Saturday the 15th instant, that she would be much obliged for the smaller north wing chamber, the east bed-chamber that had been her great-uncle's being left closed at his last wish, that she desired the lake house to be kept in every particular as Mr. Sotheran had kept it. The third was to her aunt, Mrs. Greystoke, at Brough in Westmoreland, her late mother's elder sister, an upright Westmoreland gentlewoman of 63 years, at the Greystoke house above the river, acquainting her with the matter of the holograph will, the lake house bequest, the bank draft of £6,800, and her own intended travel to Hawkshead on Saturday next. She wrote in plain Southern sentences and in mild kind filial regard, asking that her aunt would not put herself to any further inquiry until Eliza should be settled at the lake house and might write again with a fuller account. The fourth was to Mrs. Bagshaw, her schoolroom employer at the parish church house at Kendal. A letter in the proper schoolmistress form, since the customary notice had already been given in the November on Mr. Thirkell's earlier inquiry letter, and this 4th letter was no more than the formal closure of the November notice in light of the present settlement. She sealed the 4 with green wax. She set them out in an even row at the lip of the writing table. At a little before 5, she carried the 4 letters down to the lodging-house hall and put them into the post-bag by the front door for the evening collection. Mrs. Bagshaw was in the parlour at her sewing. Eliza set her hand for a moment upon the door-frame and gave Mrs. Bagshaw a level account of the morning's matter. That an elder Southern kinsman, long thought lost in the Indian seas, had not been lost, that he had been settled these 7 years at a lake house on Windermere, that he had passed in the November and had left her his lake house and a modest competence, that she would be at the schoolroom her last week and would go down to the lake on Saturday next. Mrs. Bagshaw, 64 years of age, a frank, kind Kendal woman of considerable goodness, took it without surprise, the November inquiry letter having prepared her for the broad outline of the matter. She wished Eliza much happiness in the equable Cumbrian way, and said she would be very sorry to lose her at the reading school, but very glad to see her come into her own. The week of the 10th to the 14th of January passed at the Kendal schoolroom in the customary manner of a schoolmistress's last week. Eliza went down to the parish church house each morning at 8:30 in her dove grey wool and her clean white linen collar, taught the reading class to her 8 Kendal village girls at the first forenoon hour, set them their slates at the second forenoon hour, heard their elementary recitations from the Edgeworth reader and from the parish school catechism at the afternoon hour, and walked back to Highgate at 3:30. The girls she had known these 3 years she addressed by their first names. They were not the parish of the manor, and they are not here to be set down by their number. She kept her own counsel through the week. She did not yet speak the matter of the lake house to the village girls. The Southern reticence, that mild, firm habit of her father's, who had borne the loss of his elder brother for 29 years without setting it once into the parsonage sermon book, was a habit she had taken into her own keeping by the slow inheritance of growing up at a parsonage table. She gave the 8 girls their reading class and their elementary recitations in the level Westmoreland voice they had known of her these 3 years, and Mrs. Bagshaw, at the parish church house, only such occasional sentence of practical business as the new schoolmistress's coming made needful. On the Tuesday, she gave them the reading class for the second to the last time, and on the Thursday for the last time. At the Thursday afternoon hour, when the school bell had been rung and the slates set by, the 8 girls came up to her in an even half-circle at the schoolroom hearth and presented her with a pressed Lake District wildflower album, which they had made for her at their Wednesday evening hour at the elder girl's mother's cottage. There were 9 pressings: primrose, bog violet, harebell, marsh marigold, wood anemone, lady's mantle, water avon, foxglove, and a sprig of lakeland honeysuckle, fixed with paste at the cream paper pages and labelled in the elder girl's careful young italic. Eliza thanked them with a particular gentleness in the level Westmoreland voice, and gave each girl her gloved hand, and took the album back in her reticule to Highgate. Mrs. Bagshaw, at the lodging-house parlour, pronounced it a kind country thing. Eliza laid it upon the writing-table beside her great-uncle's private letter. The Friday evening of the 14th of January came on cool and clear and pale blue at 4:30. Eliza had gone down to the schoolroom in the morning to set the parish reader and the elementary catechism into the schoolroom press for the new schoolmistress, a Mrs. Brigham of Kirkby Stephen, who was to come up on the Monday following at Mrs. Bagshaw's appointment. By 2, she had finished. By 3, she had walked back to the lodging-house. By 4:30, her travelling trunk was corded at the foot of the parlour stair, the East India chest's key on its brass ring laid upon her dressing-case top in the upper-floor chamber, and the will packet and the bank draft and her great-uncle's private letter folded together within the inner pocket of the dove-grey reticule by the writing-table. She stood at the eastern parlour sash of the lodging-house at a little past 5, and looked out across the limestone Kendal roofs to the cool, pale-blue Cumbrian January night settling upon the eastern fells. The pigeon at the chimney-stack opposite had gone in. A first star was at the southeast above the slates. The town was very still in the gentle frost. She did not yet know the lake house. She did not yet know Mrs. Greenacre or Mr. Furness, beyond the level Southron writing of their names at the foot of the holograph will. She did not yet know the cool, clear waters of Windermere at the western shore, at 3 of an afternoon, although her great-uncle had given her the colour of them in the brief phrase about her own eyes. She did not yet know the south porch of the lake house, nor the eastern fells across the water, nor the 78 acres of the western slope running down to the lake shore, nor the south library where the East India chest had stood these 7 years past at her great-uncle's settled instruction. She did not yet know any part of it. She was sensible only that an alteration had come upon her settled life of the last 3 years, that the alteration was at this present moment standing very gently at her shoulder in the parlour at Highgate, and that she would not yet attempt to name it. She set her gloved hand upon the parlour sash for the merest moment. Then she drew the cream-wool curtain across. The Morning Post chaise from the King's Arms would take her down to the lake house at 9:30. Saturday morning, the 15th of January. 1820 broke cool and clear and pale blue over the slate roofs of Kendal, and at 9:30 a hired post-chaise drew up at the south door of Eliza Sotheron's lodging-house in Strickland Gate. Mrs. Bagshaw stood at the threshold in her thick winter shawl. The lodging-house parlour-maid carried out the corded trunk and the slim leather dressing-case in which the East India chest's key lay upon its modest brass ring. Eliza, in dove-grey wool, half mourning beneath her thick travelling cloak, took her leave of Mrs. Bagshaw with frank and equable thanks for the 3 years' kind shelter at the upper-floor parlour window. The chaise-boy handed her up. Mrs. Bagshaw pressed a hot brick wrapped in flannel against her boots and gave her a small parcel of buttered Cumbrian gingerbread for the road. The door was shut. The horses moved off. The road bore north out of Kendal, climbed the long pool above the river, and bent towards the eastern shore of Windermere. Eliza watched the fells take shape through the pale blue January light. The leafless oak coppice, the long stone walls, the slate-grey villages tucked under their winter trees. She did not weep. She had not wept at Mr. Thirkell's chambers the Saturday before, nor at the schoolroom window the evening of her leaving, and she did not weep now. She was sensible of an alteration she had not yet named, but she was, in equable measure, ready to meet it. Her late father's small jet locket, that her late mother had worn at the throat at the curate's house parlour, lay warm against her own throat beneath the dove-grey wool. She put a gloved finger to it once at the long pull above the river, and then let it be. At Ambleside, the chaise turned in beneath the painted sign of the Salutation, and Eliza took her breakfast at the front parlour. Hot tea, a plate of buttered Westmoreland oatcake, a modest dish of preserved damsons. The landlady, a level-eyed Cumbrian woman in clean dark print, addressed her as Madam and did not press her with talk. Eliza was grateful. She paid her shilling, took up her cloak, and was at the chaise again within the half-hour. From Ambleside, the road bent west and dropped down through the leafless oak to Ferry Nab. The flat ferry lay at the slip, with its 2 horses and its modest oak ramp. The chaise was led aboard, and the wheels chocked. The lake, in mid-January, lay grey-blue and very still. The eastern fells stood mirrored in it. A single cormorant turned upon a low rock. Eliza, gloved hands in her lap, watched the western shore come up to meet her. The crossing took the half of an hour. They were set down on the Hawkshead side at 20 minutes past 2. The chaise wheeled north along the narrow lake road, and at 3 o'clock turned up the modest carriage drive to the lake house. She saw it then for the first time, a stone-built 2-storey lake house of grey Cumbrian stone, the slate roof darkened by the morning's brief shower, 3 sash windows wide at the south face, a modest Doric porch at the south door, the casements unshuttered. The wooded slope of leafless oak and ash ran down on the west to the lake's western shore. The eastern fells stood across the water in their winter pale blue. A thin column of wood smoke went up from the south chimney. The chaise drew to a halt at the small gravelled carriage sweep, and the chaise boy let down the step. Eliza set her gloved hand to the door frame and stepped down upon the cool slate of the south porch. A man stood at the south porch with his hat in his hand. Sturdy, of medium height, 5'10", soft mid-brown hair just brushing his collar, hazel eyes frank and level under thick Cumbrian brows, weathered fair skin from years upon the fell, a mild, firm mouth. He was in his moss-green Cumbrian shooting coat over a buff waistcoat. He inclined to her with the becoming gravity of a Westmoreland steward. "Miss Sotheron, Edward Furness, at your service. I had the keeping of the home pasture for your late great-uncle these 6 years past. Mrs. Greenacre is within. Be welcome at the lake house." Eliza thanked him with mild and frank gratitude, and gave him her gloved hand. He led her up the 3 shallow stone steps and into the south hall. The hall was wainscoted in dark Cumbrian oak, the floor of dressed slate, a coal fire settled in the modest stone hearth at the west wall. A long settle stood beneath the south sash window. Upon the wall above the settle hung a single-framed engraving of Windermere from the southern fells. The hall smelt of beeswax and wood smoke and the faint, clean tang of lake water. At the foot of the oak staircase, a woman of 60 years stood upright, iron-grey hair beneath a clean white linen cap, eyes a level pale blue, the true Cumbrian fell blue, very direct, slender, of 5'4", the back unbent, in dove-grey serge half-mourning with a clean white lawn fichu pinned at the throat, the modest brass and leather chatelaine at her hip. She inclined. "Miss Sotheron, Margaret Greenacre. I had the housekeeper's keys at this house for your great-uncle these 7 years and 3 months. The household stands ready at your direction." Behind her, in the doorway to the kitchen passage, 2 further figures inclined. The cook, a woman of 52, ruddy-cheeked, soft grey-brown hair beneath a large white linen cap, warm blue-grey eyes kind and attentive, in dark blue print cotton with a white apron. The housemaid, a girl of 22, of 5'4", soft fair hair beneath a clean white linen cap, frank pale blue eyes, in dark grey print cotton with white apron. "Mrs. Polwell has had the keeping of the kitchen since 1813, Mrs. Greenacre said in her level Cumbrian voice. "Miss Sally Bagot has been the housemaid since 1817. Sally, Miss Sotheron's trunk." The girl bobbed and went down the steps for the trunk. Mrs. Polwell inclined with kind, warm gravity. "There is hot tea in the south parlour at your pleasure, miss." Eliza thanked her by name. All 4 of the household stood in their Cumbrian mourning blacks, Mrs. Greenacre's dove-grey serge, Mr. Furness's mourning band at his shooting-coat sleeve, Mrs. Polwell in dark blue with a black armlet, Miss Bagot in dark grey, and Eliza was sensible, at the first quiet minute in that south hall, that the house was in true mourning, still for the man she had never known. The death of the 17th of November lay upon it. She drew off her travelling gloves. She turned to Mrs. Greenacre and met the level, pale blue Cumbrian eyes frankly. "Mrs. Greenacre, I am sensible of your 7 years' kindness to my late uncle. Pray keep this house exactly as he kept it." Mrs. Greenacre acquiesced with kind and mild Cumbrian gravity. She inclined the iron-grey head once. "It shall be done so, Miss Sotheron. Your late great-uncle was a master of even and gracious ways. We knew his hours and we knew his preferences. We shall keep them." Eliza thanked her. She did not say more. She felt, and the level pale blue eyes opposite seemed to know it, that the words had been the right ones. She asked then to be put up in the smaller north wing chamber. The east bedchamber that had been her great-uncle's she would keep closed at his own last instructions, she said. The modest north wing chamber would do for her very well. Mrs. Greenacre inclined again. The arrangement, she observed, had been Mr. Sotheran's own settled wish. Miss Baggett took the trunk up the oak stair. Mrs. Polwale withdrew to the kitchen passage. Mr. Furness took his leave at the south porch, with the promise to wait upon Eliza at the south library at her own appointed hour. Mrs. Greenacre led Eliza up to the north wing chamber, a modest north-facing room with a single-sash window upon the leafless coppice, a clean, neat bed in white linen, a writing table at the window, a chest of drawers in pale Cumbrian oak, a basin and ewer in white china. The fire had been lit an hour. The chamber was warm. This was the chamber your great-uncle had prepared for you these 3 years past, Miss Sotheran, Mrs. Greenacre said in her level voice. He spoke of you by name as Eliza. He hoped you would think it kind. Eliza, at the writing table at the window, put her gloved hand for a moment on the pale oak. She did not weep. She said in a mild and level voice, I think it very kind, Mrs. Greenacre. Pray thank Mrs. Polwale for the fire. Mrs. Greenacre inclined and withdrew. Eliza stood alone at the north sash window and looked out upon the leafless oak slope and the cool, clear, pale blue Cumbrian afternoon. She drew a single, careful breath. Then she set about the work of unpacking her dressing-case. Sunday the 16th of January broke fair and pale. At 10:30, Eliza set out on foot along the narrow lake path to St. Michael's at Hawkshead, Mrs. Greenacre 3 paces behind. The walk took the half of an hour. The church bell was ringing as they came to the lych gate. Eliza took the modest north pew that had been her great-uncle's, Mrs. Greenacre in the pew behind. The Reverend Geoffrey Goodfellow gave the morning service. He was a man of 56, soft, sandy grey hair, finely thinning at the crown, attentive blue-grey eyes behind gold-rimmed spectacles, weathered Cumbrian skin, a long, mild, clean-shaven face, of medium height, 5'10", thin and slightly stooped at the shoulders. In plain black cassock, with white linen surplice. His voice in the reading of the psalm was even and gentle-voiced. He preached for the half of 20 minutes from the Epistle to the Philippians on the becoming temper of a thankful heart. Eliza heard him out attentively. After the service, Reverend Goodfellow came down the south aisle and met her at the south porch. He inclined to her with the attentive gravity that his gold-rimmed spectacles made the more becoming. Miss Sotheran, you are very welcome at Hawkshead. I am Geoffrey Goodfellow, curate of this parish these 21 years. I had the honour of your great-uncle's friendship these 7 years past, and I had the further honour of being the witness, with Mrs. Greenacre, to his holograph will of the September last. Pray do me the kindness of letting me walk you back along the lake path. Eliza accepted in mild and frank gratitude. Mrs. Greenacre fell to 3 paces behind. The 3 of them took the narrow path west and south along the western shore. It was a clear afternoon. The lake lay pale blue. A single fisherman's boat was drawn up at the modest jetty below the lake house. At the south porch, at 20 past noon by the low Cumbrian sun, Reverend Goodfellow stopped and turned to Eliza and gave her, with his attentive blue-grey gaze level upon her, a brief account of her great-uncle's 7 Hawkshead years. The simple morning fell walks Mr. Sotheran had walked the home slope, and the modest north fell every fair morning of his 7 years, until the September of 1819, the modest book-reading at the south parlour. He had taken his afternoons in the company of Cowper, Wordsworth, Smollett, The Spectator, and the modest Calcutta book of his Sumatra years. The gentle Cumbrian kindness to the village school. He had paid for the north windows of the parish schoolroom in 1814. He had bought the parish books for the 6 village girls' reading class for 5 winters past. He had given the modest annual sum of £50 to the parish poor at every Christmas of his 7 Hawkshead years. He had never given his Southern name. He had given it only as Mr. Bowness, and he had asked Reverend Goodfellow to give it so to the parish. He was a man of even and frank temper, Miss Southern, Reverend Goodfellow said, with the attentive blue-grey gaze level upon her face. He grieved his silence to his Southern kin. He spoke of you by name to me at our every monthly tea these 3 years past. He spoke of you as the only daughter of the brother he had lost. Eliza inclined. She did not speak. Reverend Goodfellow drew a careful breath. He looked once across the lake to the eastern fells, and once at the south porch under his boots, and once at Eliza's face. He spoke again, more level still. Miss Southern, there is a further thing that you should be told, and that I would rather you heard from me at this porch than from the East India chest at the South Library. In the spring of 1813, after I had been the half of a year acquainted with your great-uncle, and had received his confidence as to his Southern name and his East India past, I wrote, at his own settled wish, to your late father, the Reverend John Southern at Kirkland, and I made known to him in confidence that the elder brother he had believed lost at sea in 1791 was living at the lake house at Hawkshead under the simple name of Mr. Adam Bowness. Your father took the matter in mild and frank thankfulness. He wrote in answer at once. He and your great-uncle corresponded at the parish post from the spring of 1813 to your father's death of the autumn of 1816, 3 years and the half of a year. Their letters were addressed to Mr. Adam Bowness, care of myself at Hawkshead Parsonage. They are at the East India chest at the South Library. I had asked Mr. Southern that they should be there for you. I had asked him that I should be the one to tell you of them at this porch. And I am the one telling you. He stopped. The attentive blue-grey eyes did not leave her face. Eliza stood quite still. She heard the thin wind in the leafless oak. She heard a single cormorant pass low across the water. She heard the iron-grey housekeeper 3 paces behind shift her boots once upon the slate and stand again unmoving. That her father had known, that her father had written, that the 3 years of her father's last decline had been a 3 years' correspondence with a brother she had not herself known to be alive, and that no word of it had ever come to her hand. She felt, for the half of a minute at the south porch, a fall of something in her that she had not expected to feel. She did not let it show. She drew one even breath at the thin Cumbrian wind, and she met Reverend Goodfellow's attentive gaze with mild and firm and equable gravity. Reverend Goodfellow, I thank you for the kindness of telling me at this porch. I had not known. My father did not write of it to me. The wish, I think, was that I should not be told until the matter could be told plainly, and the matter could not be told plainly until my great-uncle's death. I do not blame him for it. I shall read the letters at my own measured pace. I am grateful that they are there for me to read. I am grateful that you wrote to him in the spring of 1813. He had 3 years' comfort of a brother thought lost. That is a great kindness, and I am sensible of it. Reverend Goodfellow inclined the sandy-grey head once. The attentive blue-grey gaze grew gentler still behind the thin gold rims. Miss Southern, you bear it as your father bore it. The Southern temper is an even one. He took his leave at the south porch. He would call upon her, he said, at her own appointed hour at the parish school. She thanked him. Mrs. Greenacre opened the south door. Eliza went in. She did not go to the South Library that afternoon. She took her tea at the north parlour, and walked the home slope for the half of an hour with Mrs. Greenacre at her elbow. She wrote one letter at the writing-table at the north sash window. to her aunt Mrs. Greystoke at Brough in the matter of her safe arrival, and she went early to her bed at the north wing chamber. She slept the sound sleep of a woman who has heard, in a single Sunday, the thing she had not expected to hear, and has met it level. Monday and Tuesday passed in the modest settling of the north chamber and the south library. Mrs. Greenacre walked Eliza the south library at 10 on the Monday morning, and the housekeeper's accounts of the 7 years past. Mrs. Polwale set the kitchen book before her at 4. Miss Baggett brought up her writing desk from the south parlour. The lake house began, by the modest daily measures of its mistress, to take her hand. Tuesday, the 18th of January, at 10:30. Mrs. Greenacre came up to the south library carrying, in her own thin level arms, a chest of dark Sumatran teak, brass-cornered, of about 2.5 feet in length, bound with 2 brass straps. She set it upon the writing-table at the south sash window. The East India chest, Miss Sotheron. Your late great-uncle had it under his own bed at the east bedchamber. He asked, the week of his death, that it should be brought up to the south library at your coming. I have not opened it. The key is in your hand. Eliza took out from her dressing-case the small brass ring. She fitted the small brass key into the small brass lock. The lock turned with a single, even click. She lifted the lid. Within lay first, in a wrapped square of red Calcutta cotton, a cloth-bound book of about 1.5 inches thick, in Calcutta binding, with no title at the spine, but Mr. Sotheron's own careful italic at the cover paper. A plain account of my Sumatran years, 1791 to 1793, and of my after years at Calcutta and Canton, 1793 to 1810, written at the Lake House at Hawkshead by Adam Sotheron in his 68th year. 187 pages of close, clean script. The manuscript memoir. Beneath the memoir, a pile of brown cloth ledgers, 6 in number, dated upon their spines in Sotheron italic, 1793 to 1810. The Calcutta and Canton account books. Beneath the ledgers, a slim wallet of foolscap papers tied with red tape. The Falmouth return papers of October 1812. Beneath the wallet is a folded parchment in 2 thicknesses. The Hawkshead Lake House deeds of October 1812. And beneath the parchment, at the bottom of the chest, wrapped in a square of clean dark blue linen, a single neat bundle tied with white tape. Eliza lifted the bundle out. She loosed the tape. The papers within were letters, 39 in number by her brief count, and they were in her late father's hand. She knew his hand. She had known his hand at her writing lesson at 6 years old at the curate's house at Kirkland. She knew the long, careful, Sotheron italic of the lowercase d, the short, final stroke of the y, the neat, careful Greek e. She knew it at the first paper she lifted, addressed in that hand to Mr. Adam Bowness, care of the Reverend G. Goodfellow, Hawkshead Parsonage, Hawkshead on Windermere, Westmoreland, and postmarked Kirkland, May 4th, 1813. She set the bundle on the writing table. She set the bundle aside. She turned to Mrs. Greenacre. The housekeeper stood at the writing table with the level, pale blue Cumbrian gaze, attentive and gentle. Mrs. Greenacre, pray ask Mrs. Polwale to send up a modest pot of tea at 3. I shall be at the South Library. Mrs. Greenacre inclined and withdrew. Eliza opened the topmost of the 39 letters at the writing table. It was dated May 4th, 1813, and it began, "My dear and most unlooked-for brother." And she stopped at the line and put her hand flat upon the foolscap for the half of a minute, and she felt for a single beat the same fall at her chest that she had felt the Sunday at the south porch. She did not weep. She read it through. Her father, 52 years of age and in the 2nd year of his last decline, in his even modest curate's house parlour at Kirkland, taking the news from Reverend Goodfellow at Hawkshead in mild and frank thankfulness, writing his elder brother's hand for the first time in 22 years. She read 2 more. The second was from the autumn of 1813, a calm and frank account of her own teaching at the Kirkland Reading School the spring before. The third, from the spring of 1814, gave her great-uncle the modest Cumbrian doings of his Kirkland parish. She laid the bundle aside at the 3rd letter. She would read the rest, she resolved, at a considered fortnight-by-fortnight pace as the spring lengthened. 2 or 3 at the Sunday afternoon, no more. She would not gulp them at one sitting. She wrote at the writing table that afternoon a single page to Reverend Goodfellow, thanking him in mild and frank words for his kindness at the south porch the Sunday before, and acquainting him that she had opened the chest and had begun the letters at her own measured pace. She sealed the page and gave it to Miss Bagot for the Hawkshead parsonage by the morning post. The fortnight, from the 18th of January to the 30th, went by in the modest Cumbrian measures of its settling. Her week took its considered Cumbrian shape, writing table mornings at the South Library, fell walks with Mr. Furness on the Mondays, the parish school's reading class on the Thursdays at Reverend Goodfellow's settled arrangement, Sunday at St. Michael's. Monday the 24th of January at 10 of the morning, Mr. Furness walked Eliza the wooded slope of the home pasture. 78 acres of leafless oak coppice and slope and lake shore, running west from the south porch down to the western shore, marked at the north by the parish lane and at the south by the Hawkshead beck. He showed her the boundary stones, the modest herd of 6 Cumbrian fell ewes wintered at the south slope, the oak coppice that yielded the lake house its winter fuel, the modest jetty at the western shore at which her great-uncle had kept a single flat fishing boat, now drawn up and tarred over for the winter. He brought her at the writing table at the South Library a slim, canvas-bound pasture records book in his own even hand, and he set out for her the rents of the North Field and the South Field at the Lady Day quarter-day come. He was a frank man, plain-spoken, attentive, with the level Cumbrian habit of giving the figure first and the opinion after. Eliza was sensible, at the half of that morning, that her great-uncle had chosen his steward well, and she was sensible also that the man at her writing table would do as well for her as he had done for the man before her. She signed the canvas book at his finger. She thanked him by name. Thursday the 27th of January at 3. Eliza walked the lake path north to the parish schoolroom at Hawkshead. Miss Bagot 3 paces behind with the modest basket of reading books. Reverend Goodfellow met her at the schoolroom door and led her in. 6 village girls stood in their pinafores at the long oak form. The schoolmistress, Mrs. Atkinson, a level Cumbrian woman of 40 in clean dark print, stood at the south wall. Reverend Goodfellow inclined to Eliza in the attentive, gentle-voiced way of his porch the Sunday before. Miss Sotheran, the standing hour at 3 on the Thursdays is yours at your settled wish. The girls are very ready. Eliza took the hour. She read with the 6 girls a passage from Maria Edgeworth's Frank, the chapter of the young boy and the kind hedge carpenter, and she heard each of the 6 in her turn at the line. She did not lecture. She corrected at the soft Cumbrian A's. She praised at the careful E's. She gave each girl a half-minute of mild and frank kindness at the last line. Reverend Goodfellow watched from the south wall. The hour ended at 4. The girls bobbed. Eliza thanked Mrs. Atkinson. She walked back the lake path to the lake house with Miss Bagot 3 paces behind. The cool, pale yellow January afternoon, sloping at the western fells. Sunday, the 30th of January. Eliza walked the narrow lake path to St. Michael's at the same 10:30. Reverend Goodfellow gave the morning service from the 2nd chapter of Philippians upon the duty of a level and untroubled heart. Eliza heard him with the same attentive gravity she had brought to the porch a fortnight past. After the service, she walked back the lake path west and south to the lake house with Mrs. Greenacre 3 paces behind. At the south porch she stopped, as she had stopped at the south porch a fortnight before, and turned and looked east across Windermere to the eastern fells. The afternoon was cool and clear and pale blue. The single column of wood smoke went up from the south chimney. Mr. Furness's grey fell pony stood tied at the modest stone post at the carriage sweep. A single cormorant turned upon the lake. She was settled at the lake. She knew it then. At the south porch, on the cool, clear, pale blue Sunday afternoon of the 30th of January, with the iron-grey housekeeper 3 paces behind and the eastern fells across the water. She had heard, at this porch a fortnight before, the thing she had not expected to hear. She had opened at the South Library writing table the chest she had not known to look for. She had begun, at her own considered pace, the letters of a father whose 3 last years she had not known were also a brother's. She had walked the slope. She had taken the reading class. She had signed at Mr. Furness's finger. She was a Southron at the lake house at Hawkshead on Windermere. And the lake house, in the modest Cumbrian measures of a fortnight, had taken her hand. She drew a single even breath at the thin wind off the lake, and she turned to Mrs. Greenacre with mild and equable kindness, and she said, "Pray ask Mrs. Polwell to send up tea at the south parlour at 4. I shall be at the writing table the half-hour first." Mrs. Greenacre inclined. The south door opened. Eliza went in. Wednesday morning, the 2nd of February, 1820, broke cool and pale blue over the western fells of Windermere. The lake stood unruffled to its southern reach, the leafless oak coppice on the south slope catching a thin February light, and from the kitchen below came the settled chime of Mrs. Polwell's kettle and the considered tread of Miss Bagot at the pantry door. Eliza Southron sat at the South Library writing table at 10:30. Her dove-grey wool half-mourning was buttoned at the throat with the clean white linen collar she had worn at her arrival a fortnight and more past. Her dark auburn hair was pinned smooth at the nape. Her pale blue eyes were settled upon the parish accounts of the Hawkshead reading class, 6 village girls' subscriptions of 1 shilling and 6pence a quarter, the particulars of which she had taken into her own management at Reverend Goodfellow's measured request. The Morning Post came up at the customary hour. Mrs. Greenacre brought the letters in upon a mahogany tray with the gentle Cumbrian step of a housekeeper of 7 years' service. Her iron-grey hair was clean beneath her white linen cap. Her pale blue Cumbrian eyes were level. Her dove-grey serge half-mourning was unhurried. She set the tray at Eliza's right hand and stood 3 paces back at the south sash window. There were 4 letters, one from Mr. Thirkell at Kendal, acknowledging the Lady Day rent calculation, one from her aunt Mrs. Greystoke at Brew, in the customary 3 weekly lines, one from Mrs. Bagshaw at the Kendal Reading School, and the 4th, a folded sheet of stout cream Liverpool foolscap, sealed in dark wax with no crest, directed in a sharp Liverpool clerk's hand to Miss Eliza Southron at the Lake House, Hawkshead on Windermere, Westmoreland. Eliza broke the seal with the ivory paper knife at her right hand. She read once through, the equable settle of her face not altering. She read it a second time, more attentively. Then she laid the sheet flat upon the green baize writing table and looked once, level and considered, at Mrs. Greenacre at the south sash window. The letter was signed Falkirk, and was upon the printed heading of Mr. Daniel Falkirk, solicitor of Castle Street, Liverpool. It ran in the sharp clerical Liverpool hand of a man accustomed to dispatch business by the morning post and to expect his terms accepted by the evening one. Castle Street, Liverpool. The 30th day of January, 1820. Madame, I am instructed by my client, Mr. Ezekiel Strangeways, lately of Bold Street in this town, cotton broker, to acquaint you with the following particulars, touching upon the estate of the late Mr. Adam Sotheran of Hawkshead on Windermere, deceased the 17th of November last, of which you are the residuary devise under the holograph will of the 14th of September last past. Mr. Strangeways was for the years 1813 to 1817 the silent partner of the said Mr. Sotheran, then trading at Liverpool and Calcutta under the name of Mr. Bonus, in 2 East India cotton ventures, of which my client's outlay in the second amounted to £3,200 and was wholly lost upon the failure of the second venture in 1817. Mr. Strangeways further states that in May 1815 the said Mr. Sotheran did, upon his gentleman's word, undertake that in the event of the failure of the second venture my client should have, as collateral against the loss, a 1/4 undivided interest in the Lake House estate and the Sotheran pasture of 78 acres adjoining, the present worth of which interest my client lays at approximately £2,800. To avoid the necessity of a chancery proceeding, my client is prepared to receive from you the sum of £1,400 in cash, payable within 14 days of the date hereof, in full and final discharge of his claim against the said estate. I have the honour to be, Madame, your obedient servant, Daniel Falkirk. Eliza read it a third time at the same even pace. She folded the sheet once at the original crease and set it flat at the green baize. Then she drew her own letter paper toward her, dipped her pen, and wrote in her settled italic to Mr. Thirkell at Strickland Gate, Kendal. Lake House at Hawkshead, Wednesday the 2nd of February. Dear Sir, I enclose by this afternoon's post a letter received an hour past from one Mr. Daniel Falkirk, solicitor at Castle Street in Liverpool, written on behalf of one Mr. Ezekiel Strangeways, who advances a claim against the estate. I am much obliged for your considered direction at your earliest convenience. I am, sir, with all proper esteem, your obedient servant, Eliza Sotheran. She sealed the packet with the Sotheran seal Mr. Sotheran had left in the East India chest, and gave it into Mrs. Greenacre's hand for the afternoon mail coach. Mrs. Greenacre took it without remark. The Wednesday wore on at its settled Windermere shape. She did not, she said inwardly at the writing table that evening, propose to be alarmed. She proposed instead to wait upon Mr. Thirkell's measured opinion. Friday morning, the 4th of February, dawned again cool and pale blue. At 3 o'clock, a hired Kendal gig turned up the carriage drive at the western shore. Mr. Finesse came across the gravel at his settled gait, sturdy, 5'10" upright, soft, mid-brown hair just brushing his collar, frank Cumbrian hazel eyes, weathered fair skin, in his moss-green Cumbrian shooting coat. He took the rein of the Kendal horse himself. Mr. Thirkell stepped down, thinning silver-grey hair carefully combed back, attentive grey eyes behind the gold-rimmed spectacles, weathered fair Cumbrian skin, medium 5'9" upright, in his black superfine white cravat, black silk waistcoat, slate-grey pantaloons, polished black shoes. Under his left arm was a stout buff paper bundle tied with red tape. Mrs. Greenacre received him at the south porch in mild Cumbrian hospitality, and showed him through to the library. Eliza rose at the writing table. Mr. Thirkell, I am much obliged. Miss Sotheran, the matter is, at first glance, a matter for the Kendal afternoon, and not for the Chancery Courts in Westminster. Pray let me see the Falkirk letter. She gave it into his hand. Mr. Thirkell sat at the green baize writing table opposite hers, set his gold-rimmed spectacles a careful fraction further up his nose, and read the Falkirk letter through 3 times, the first at the lawyer's reading pace, the second pausing at the May 1815 sentence, the third pausing at the November 1817 silence in the Falkirk text. His attentive grey eyes did not alter at any reading. He laid the sheet flat at his right hand and looked across the table at Eliza. "Miss Sotheron, I observe 3 matters. The first is the law, the second is the fact, the third is the deceased's intention. I shall take them in their turn." Eliza inclined a careful fraction. "As to the law, Mr. Falkirk advances an oral agreement of May 1815, undocumented, unwitnessed, evidenced only by Mr. Strangeway's own unsupported recollection. This is plainly a contract concerning an interest in land, under the Statute of Frauds, passed at Westminster in the 29th year of King Charles II, that is, 1677. Every such contract must be in writing, signed by the party to be charged, or by his lawful agent. There is no exception for gentlemen's words. Mr. Strangeways has nothing in writing. The first ground is therefore at law unenforceable, and would be dismissed by any Chancery judge within 10 minutes of the bill being opened." Eliza inclined a second careful fraction. "As to the fact, pray let us look at the Calcutta account book." Mrs. Greenacre, at her sewing chair by the south sash window, rose at her settled step and brought the Calcutta account book to the writing table, a foolscap volume in dark brown calf, the spine lettered in faded gold bowness. Calcutta, 1810 to 1818. Mr. Thirkell opened it carefully at the late autumn of 1817 and ran his attentive grey eye down the page. He set the book flat at the green baize so that the page faced Eliza across the table and laid the tip of his pen at the line. "Here, Miss Sotheron, 14th November 1817, in your late great-uncle's own hand. Received this day at the Lake House from Mr. Adam Bowness the sum of £1,800 sterling, being in full and final settlement of all claims arising upon the Honiton cotton venture loss of 1817. And at the foot of the entry, Mr. Strangeway's own signed receipt, in his own hand, witnessed by Mr. Bowness and by Mrs. Greenacre at this house." Eliza looked at the entry for a careful interval. The hand was her great-uncle's careful Sotheron italic, the receipt Mr. Strangeway's sharper Liverpool one, Mrs. Greenacre's witness signature beneath. She inclined a third time. "As to the deceased's intention, Mr. Sotheran's holograph will of the 14th of September last past makes no provision whatever for Mr. Strangeways. It was witnessed by Mrs. Greenacre and by Reverend Goodfellow, probated at the Carlisle Prerogative Court on the 22nd of December last past. The deceased's intention is at law unambiguous, the whole estate to Miss Eliza Sotheron, his one surviving kinswoman." Mr. Thirkell set his pen carefully into the brass stand. "In short, Miss Sotheron, the first ground is at law unenforceable. The second is at fact already discharged by your great-uncle's own settlement of 17. The third is contradicted by the holograph will. The claim is at its 3 grounds without foundation. Mr. Falkirk in Liverpool will himself, I venture, know this." Eliza had heard him through in mild, firm gravity, her pale blue eyes attentive at his face, her gloved hands settled at the green baize. She replied in her even Westmoreland voice, "Mr. Thirkell, the claim appears to me to be at law indefensible. Pray answer Mr. Falkirk in candid Kendall fashion." "I shall, Miss Sotheron. With your leave, I shall draft the answer on Monday morning, append certified copies of the account page and Mr. Strangeway's signed receipt, and put the packet into the Kendall mail coach on Monday evening." "You have my leave, sir. Pray remain at the Lake House tonight, at Mrs. Greenacre's arrangement of the North Guest Chamber." Mr. Thirkell inclined a careful degree. "Most obliging, Miss Sotheron." Monday morning, the 7th of February, was cool and pale blue. Mr. Thirkell sat at the writing table, from 9:30 until 1:20, and drafted the answer to Mr. Falkirk in his settled Kendal hand. The letter was 4 sides of folio, the first stating the holograph will and the deceased's unambiguous intention. The second, the statute of frauds bar to the May 1815 oral agreement. The third reproducing the Calcutta account book entry of 14th November 1817 and Mr. Strangeway's signed receipt. The fourth stating that any chancery proceeding would be vigorously defended at the expense of the estate, with costs sought against Mr. Strangeways personally upon dismissal. Mr. Thirkell sealed the packet with his Thirkell and Company Kendal seal, certified the account page and the £1, 800 receipt with his own signature and the date, and gave the packet to Mr. Furness for the Kendal mail coach. The post went out at 6:30. By Tuesday morning, the 8th of February, the packet was in Castle Street, Liverpool. By Tuesday afternoon, for the Liverpool mail returned by the same evening coach, the Falkirk reply was at the South Library. Mrs. Greenacre brought it up at 4:30. Eliza broke the seal and read it once through, then handed it across the writing table to Mr. Thirkell, who was still at the lake house. Mr. Thirkell read it through twice at his attentive Kendal pace, his attentive grey eyes behind the gold-rimmed spectacles not altering. Then he laid the sheet flat at the green baize. Mr. Falkirk concedes the statute of frauds point. He concedes the November 17 settlement. He retreats, Miss Sotheron, upon a third position. He says that Mr. Strangeways will press the claim in Chancery upon the further ground of fraudulent misrepresentation by the late Mr. Sotheron, that your great-uncle in May 1815 knowingly induced Mr. Strangeways into the second venture by representations as to its prospects, which he knew to be false. Eliza heard him in mild, firm gravity at the upright chair. "And to this further ground, sir?" "To this further ground, there is no answer that he can press at Chancery, and any answer he might press would itself be at the territory of bad faith litigation. Mr. Sotheron is deceased. The witnesses to the May 15th conversation are Mr. Sotheron and Mr. Strangeways alone. The burden of fraud upon a deceased defendant is at law one of the most rigorous a Chancery court will examine. Mr. Falkirk knows this. He is, I venture, advising his client against the proceeding and making one further attempt at the same 14-day compromise in the hope that the appearance of a Chancery filing shall induce settlement." "And what answer, sir, do you propose?" Mr. Thirkell drew a fresh sheet of folio toward him and dipped his pen. "I propose, Miss Sotheron, that I write not to Mr. Falkirk in Castle Street, who has now done his civil duty by his client, but direct to Mr. Strangeways himself at Bold Street, Liverpool, a measured Kendal solicitor's letter, declining further correspondence, stating that any Chancery filing shall be vigorously defended upon the November 17th settlement and at conscience. Pray do so, Mr. Thirkell." He wrote the letter between 5 and 6:15 that evening. It was a letter such as Mr. Thirkell, in 30 years' practice at the Westmoreland circuit, had not before written, measured, frank, and at the last paragraph plain-spoken, observing that the November 1817 settlement had been received by Mr. Strangeways' own hand, and that any present claim in Chancery upon the further ground proposed would be defended at every step and at every cost. He gave it to Mr. Furness for the Wednesday morning post. By Wednesday afternoon the letter was in Bold Street, Liverpool. By Saturday, the 12th, no reply had come. By Tuesday, the 15th, Mr. Thirkell, who had returned to his Kendal chambers but had instructed that any Liverpool correspondence be sent on to him direct, wrote to Eliza observing that the silence might be read in either of 2 ways, that Mr. Strangeways was at his Liverpool consultation, or that he was preparing to come north in person. He recommended she give Mr. Furness and Mrs. Greenacre notice that an uninvited visitor was within the range of probability. Mr. Furness At Eliza's passing on of the warning at the south parlour that Tuesday evening inclined his weathered Cumbrian face a careful degree. "Aye, ma'am, I shall keep watch at the carriage drive." Wednesday morning, the 16th of February, 1820, dawned cool and pale blue. Eliza was at the South Library writing table at 9:30 with the Hawkshead Parish Girls' Reading List. Mrs. Greenacre was at her sewing chair. Mrs. Polwhele was at the kitchen. At 11:30, a hired post-chaise, the four wheels dusted from the Liverpool Road and the Kendal Road and the Bonus Road, turned up the carriage drive at the western shore. Mr. Furness, at the home pasture above the slope, saw it from the fell path and came down at his settled walking pace. The chaise drew up at the south porch. A medium-built gentleman of about 52 stepped down. Florid, sharp-eyed, sandy thinning hair carefully oiled back beneath his town hat, fair, lightly marked Liverpool skin, weak, narrow chin, long upper lip, 5'10" upright, with a Liverpool merchant's stoop at the shoulders. He wore an expensive Manchester wool tailcoat with worn brass buttons, a primrose-yellow silk waistcoat slightly stained at the lapel, fawn pantaloons, and town boots dusted from the chaise. Under his right arm was a Liverpool Morocco note-case. He carried no quizzing glass. He looked once at the lake, sharp, businesslike, not admiring, and once at the south porch. "I am Mr. Ezekiel Strangeways of Liverpool. I have come from Liverpool to wait upon Miss Sotheran." Mr. Furness at the south porch by then, at his frank Cumbrian gait, inclined a measured Westmoreland degree. "Aye, sir. I shall inquire of Miss Sotheran. Pray step into the south parlour." He showed Mr. Strangeways through to the south parlour and stood at the parlour door. Mrs. Greenacre rose at her sewing chair and went directly to Eliza at the writing table. "Miss Sotheran, a Mr. Strangeways of Liverpool is at the south parlour." Eliza, in mild, firm gravity at the writing table, laid down her pen. She had expected him these 3 days past, and the equable settle of her face at the news was the settle of a thing foreseen. She rose. She settled the white linen collar at her throat with one even motion, pinned a stray, dark auburn lock at the nape, and turned to Mrs. Greenacre. "Pray send Mr. Furness to the parish school for Mr. Thirkell directly. He is at the North Windows Committee this morning at Reverend Goodfellow's arrangement." "Aye, Miss Sotheran." Mr. Thirkell, who had come over from Kendal on the Tuesday evening for the parish school North Windows Committee, and was at the schoolroom door at 20 to 12 when Mr. Furness came down the lake path at his weathered Cumbrian stride, was at the South Library at 5 minutes to 12 with his Calcutta account book and the November 1817 receipt beneath his left arm. "Miss Sotheran, he has come." "He has come, sir. Pray sit at the south parlour writing table with the account book at your right hand. I shall come down at the upright country chair. Mrs. Greenacre shall be at the sewing corner at her chaperonage. Mr. Furness shall be at the parlour door." "Most measured, Miss Sotheran. Pray let me observe. Say very little. Let the November 17 account page do the speaking. 2 interjections from yourself shall be sufficient." "I shall be guided, Mr. Thirkell." They went down to the south parlour together at 5 minutes past 12. The south parlour was a square room with one south sash window upon the lake and one east sash window upon the leafless oak coppice. The fire was settled at the grate. Mr. Strangeways stood at the south sash window with his Liverpool Morocco note-case open upon the parlour table at his right hand, his sharp Liverpool eye at the lake. He turned at the door as Eliza came in. She inclined a measured Cumbrian degree. He inclined a sharper Liverpool one. The merchant's bow, brisk and businesslike. Mr. Thirkell inclined the third. Mrs. Greenacre took her sewing chair at the parlour corner with her sewing in her lap. Mr. Finesse took his post at the parlour door, his frank Cumbrian hazel eyes upon Mr. Strangeway's shoulders. Eliza took the upright country chair at the parlour table. Mr. Thirkell took the writing chair at her right hand, the Calcutta account book at his right hand, the November 1817 receipt loose at the top of it. When Eliza, in her mild, firm Westmoreland voice, inclined a measured degree at the chair opposite, Mr. Strangeways took it briskly. He laid his sharp Liverpool eye upon her, upon Mr. Thirkell, upon the Calcutta account book, and back upon her. He was a man who had bullied his way out of 3 Liverpool counting-houses, and his settled habit was at the surface of his face. Miss Sotheran, I have come from Liverpool by the Tuesday night chaise and the Wednesday morning. I have not slept above 4 hours. I shall not waste your morning at preliminaries. Your solicitor's letter of Tuesday last past was at Bold Street Wednesday morning. I have answered it by coming. I have come to settle this matter at the parlour table within the hour. He laid one florid hand upon the Liverpool morocco note-case. Your late great-uncle, Miss Sotheran, trading at Calcutta and Liverpool as one Mr. Bonus, was my silent partner in 2 East India cotton ventures of 1813 and 1817. In the second, I lost £3,200. He gave me at Liverpool in May 1815, in the counting-house room at Bold Street, in the presence of no one, his gentleman's word that I should have a quarter interest in his lake house at Hawkshead as collateral against the second venture's failure. The venture failed. He paid me £1,800 in November 17, which I acknowledged. The settlement was a partial one only. The collateral interest in the lake house remains at law mine. I propose, Miss Sotheran, to spare you Chancery, to take £1,400 within 14 days for my withdrawal. I am at the South Parlour to receive your settled answer. He paused. He looked at Eliza. Eliza inclined a careful degree at Mr. Thirkell. Mr. Thirkell, his attentive grey eyes behind the gold-rimmed spectacles upon Mr. Strangeway's florid face, replied at his own settled Kendal pace. Mr. Strangeways, I observe 3 matters. The first is that an oral agreement concerning an interest in land is at law unenforceable under the Statute of Frauds of 1677, of which the relevant section is the 4th. There is no exception. The second is that the November 1817 settlement, recorded at your own signed receipt at the foot of this Calcutta account page, which I now lay before you, is upon its plain words a settlement in full and final discharge of all claims arising upon the Honiton cotton venture loss. The third is that Mr. Sotheran's holograph will of September last past makes no provision whatever for yourself. There is upon these 3 grounds no claim at law that can be sustained at Chancery. He laid the open Calcutta account book at the parlour table between them, the November 1817 page upward, Mr. Strangeway's own Liverpool hand at the foot in the receipt. Mr. Strangeways did not look down at the page. He looked at Eliza. Miss Sotheran, your solicitor speaks of the statute of frauds and of receipts. I speak of a gentleman's word given to me at Bold Street in May 15 by a man now beyond contradiction. I propose to press the matter in Chancery upon the further ground of fraudulent misrepresentation. The bill shall name yourself as residuary devizee. It shall lie upon the Chancery list these 4 years. Your lake house shall not pass at quiet through it. You are 28, Miss Sotheran. Your fortune is at this lake house. I propose to spare you 4 years of Chancery and the cost thereof, £1,400 in cash within 14 days. Mrs. Greenacre at the sewing corner did not look up. Mr. Finesse at the parlour door did not move. Eliza laid her gloved hands settled at the parlour table. She looked once at the November 1817 account page at her right hand, once at Mr. Thirkell at her right hand, once at Mr. Strangeways across the table. Her pale blue eyes were level. "Mr. Strangeways, you have my answer in one sentence. My late great-uncle, Mr. Adam Sotheran, in his Calcutta account book of the 14th of November, 1817, which Mr. Thirkell now lays before you, paid your full settlement of £1,800 for the Honiton cotton venture loss, with your own signed receipt at the foot. Your present claim is at law indefensible and, at conscience, worse. Mr. Furness, this gentleman is leaving us. I wish you a temperate journey back to Liverpool." She inclined a measured Westmoreland degree at the upright country chair and laid her gloved hands at the parlour table. Mr. Strangeways looked at the November 1817 receipt. He looked at his own signature at the foot. He looked at Mr. Thirkell. He looked at the parlour door, at which Mr. Furness now stood at a Cumbrian fell rider's 5'10" in his moss-green shooting coat. The florid Liverpool face altered a fraction at the brows. He closed the Liverpool morocco note-case with one sharp Liverpool motion and stood from the parlour chair. He did not bow. He took his town hat from the parlour table side-piece and went out at the parlour door before Mr. Furness. Mr. Furness showed him through the south hall to the south porch and to the post-chaise at the carriage drive at 20 past noon. The chaise turned upon the gravel and rolled south down the carriage drive toward the Hawkshead Lane and the Bowness Ferry Road. Mr. Furness came back through the south hall at his weathered Cumbrian stride, and stood at the south parlour door at his settled inclination. The set of his weathered face was of the kind Cumbrian gravity of a steward of 6 years' service who has seen his master's affairs vindicated at the post-chaise. He spoke one measured sentence. "He is gone. Our Miss Sotheran." Eliza inclined a measured degree at the upright country chair. "I am much obliged, Mr. Furness. Pray ask Mrs. Polwheel to bring tea at the South Library at 1:30. "Aye, ma'am." Mr. Thirkell returned the Calcutta account book to its buff paper wrapper and the November 1817 receipt to his pocket-book. He inclined a careful Kendall degree. "Miss Sotheran, he shall not, I venture, file at Chancery. The merchant has run his bluff at the parlour table, and the parlour table has stood at the November 17 page. But I shall, at my Strickland Gate chambers, make a separate inquiry of his Liverpool affairs through my London correspondent at Lincoln's Inn. Within a week I shall know." "Pray do so, Mr. Thirkell." He took his leave at 20 to 2, after a careful Cumbrian tea. Mr. Furness took the Kendall horse from the stable and the gig from the carriage-house, and Mr. Thirkell rolled south down the carriage drive at 20 to 3. Thursday the 17th was cool and pale blue. At the Evening Post, 6:30 at the South Library, a letter came up from Mr. Thirkell at Kendal, dated the same day, conveying the substance of his London correspondent's reply at Lincoln's Inn that morning. Eliza opened it at the writing-table at 6:45. Strickland Gate, Kendal, Thursday the 17th of February. My dear Miss Sotheran, I have today had returned from my London correspondent at Lincoln's Inn an account of Mr. Strangeways' Liverpool affairs. Mr. Strangeways is overextended at the Liverpool cotton-broking houses to the sum of £4,200, the larger part upon 2 bills falling due at Whitsuntide. He is pressed by 3 creditors, each of whom has put him in writing within the past month. His solicitor, Mr. Falkirk, cannot file the Chancery bill without retainer of 50 guineas, which retainer Mr. Strangeways has now been refused at 2 of the 3 Liverpool sponsor houses he applied to. The third, Tarleton and Earl of Castle Street, has agreed in principle, but upon terms, a second mortgage upon his own Bold Street counting-house, which Mr. Strangeways cannot meet at the present pressure of his creditors. The proceeding therefore cannot, in the present posture of his affairs, be brought at all. I have the honour to be, your obedient servant, Joshua Thirkell. Eliza read it twice at the writing table and laid it flat at the green baize at her right hand. She wrote a reply in the morning by the Friday post, 3 measured Westmoreland lines thanking Mr. Thirkell for his particular care, sealed the note, gave it to Mr. Furness for the Friday mail, and returned to her parish school reading list. The week between Friday the 18th and Friday the 25th wore on at the Windermere shape Eliza had begun to know. Writing table mornings, fell walks at the leafless oak coppice with Mrs. Greenacre, the Thursday reading class at Reverend Goodfellow's arrangement, Sunday matins at St. Michael's. Friday the 25th of February dawned cool and pale yellow over the western fells, the first faint alteration of the late winter light. At the Morning Post, 10:30, Mrs. Greenacre brought up to the South Library a folded sheet of stout cream Liverpool foolscap, sealed in dark wax, directed in the same sharp Liverpool clerk's hand of 3 weeks past to Miss Eliza Sotheran, at the Lake House, Hawkshead on Windermere, Westmoreland. Eliza broke the seal at the writing table and read it once through. Castle Street, Liverpool, the 23rd day of February, 1820. Madam, I am instructed by my client, Mr. Ezekiel Strangeways, to acquaint you that he does not propose to proceed further with the matter of his claim against the estate of the late Mr. Adam Sotheran. The proposed chancery filing of the 8th instant is hereby withdrawn. Mr. Strangeways desires no further correspondence in this matter. I have the honour to be, Madame, your obedient servant, Daniel Falkirk. She read it a second time. She folded the sheet at the original crease and laid it modest at the corner of the green baize. She wrote 2 lines by the same morning's post to Mr. Thirkell at Kendal, acquainting him with the withdrawal, sealed the note, and gave it into Mrs. Greenacre's hand. The matter, as a matter of correspondence, was settled. She did not celebrate it. She rose at the writing table, stood a careful interval at the south sash window, and looked once down the wooded slope at the leafless oak coppice and once across the lake to the eastern fells. The Cumbrian sky was the colour of clean lake water. The matter was done. Saturday afternoon, the 26th of February. Eliza at the South Library writing table at 3:30. The Falkirk withdrawal folded modest at her elbow upon the green baize. The Calcutta account book closed at her right hand, the brass and ivory paper knife at her left, the parish school list before her in her settled italic. The fire was settled at the coals. Mrs. Greenacre was at her sewing chair, Miss Bagot at the parlour below, Mrs. Polwell at the kitchen, Mr. Furness at the home pasture above the slope. She did not celebrate the withdrawal. The matter had been at law indefensible from the first. It had been answered at law in its measure. It had been put to its end at the parlour table of the 16th and at the Liverpool post of the 25th. It was a matter for the settled gratitude of a woman who had been spared 4 years of chancery by her great-uncle's careful Sotheran italic at the Calcutta page of the 14th of November, and by Mr. Thirkell's attentive Kendal grey eyes behind the gold-rimmed spectacles at the south parlour table of the 16th. Eliza laid one gloved hand at the Falkirk withdrawal and one at her parish school list. She inclined her dark auburn head a measured degree at the green baize. The Windermere afternoon stood cool and clear and pale yellow over the western fells. The leafless oak coppice on the south slope caught the late winter light at its leafless branches and held it. Out upon the lake, the Ferry Nab ferry was visible, returning a single Bowness-bound traveller across the water. The matter was at its settled end. Eliza took up her pen and turned to the parish school list. The first name at the column was Bryony Atkinson, the second, Susanna Postlethwaite, the third, Constance Walker. She wrote down each of them in her measured italic, and the careful hand of a woman who had nothing further upon her mind that afternoon than the Hawkshead village girls' subscriptions of 1 shilling and 6 pence a quarter. The late February rain blew in from the western fells on the Monday morning that followed Mr. Falkirk's withdrawal, and the lake house at Hawkshead on Windermere took its first true breath under its new mistress. Eliza Sotheran had slept that night without any further attendance upon Liverpool letters, and she rose on the Tuesday at 7:30 to the lake's grey close at the sash window of her north wing chamber, sensible of an alteration in the air that the village had begun to feel before she had named it. Her week took its considered Cumbrian shape: writing table mornings at the South Library, fell walks with Mr. Furness on the Mondays, the parish school's reading class on the Thursdays at Reverend Goodfellow's settled arrangement, the customary Sunday morning at St. Michael's, where the Sotheran pew at the south aisle had been kept for her these 6 Sundays past. Mrs. Greenacre brought up the South Library coal at 7:30 on each weekday morning, drew back the dove-grey curtains at the east sash, set the writing-table inkstand and the household ledger and the silver letter-knife at their accustomed places, and stepped back to the housekeeper's cupboard before her young mistress descended. Mr. Furness rode in from the home pasture cottage at 8 on the Mondays to walk the wooded south slope with her, the moss-green shooting coat dampened at the shoulders, the frank Cumbrian hazel eyes lifted at the eastern fells whenever the cloud over Loughrigg lifted with it. On the first Thursday of March, the reading class at the village school began in earnest. Reverend Goodfellow had arranged for Eliza to take 6 village girls at the rectory parlour from 2 o'clock to 4 on the Thursdays through Lent: Bryony Atkinson, Dorcas Hodgson, Constance Walker, Tabitha Robinson, Patience Tinker, and Susanna Postlethwaite, the eldest 14 and the youngest 9, the daughters of the home pasture tenant, of the parish wheelwright, of the lakeshore boatman, of the Southwood Edge cottager, of the rectory's own gardener, and of the elder Postlethwaite at the South Croft. They read from Maria Edgeworth's Frank and from the bog violet passages of Mr. Cowper, and Eliza taught them at the rectory writing table the rudiments of beginning French and beginning Latin, the Thursdays passing in measured industry. Bryony Atkinson, 14 and the eldest, read most clearly. Patience Tinker, 9 and the youngest, copied her letters at the slate with a careful, mild attention that put her tongue between her teeth. Reverend Goodfellow, in the doorway at 3:30, with his slender gold-rimmed spectacles pushed up to his sandy grey hair, observed to Mrs. Greenacre on the second Thursday that he had not seen the rectory parlour the brighter for any reading mistress these 15 years past. Mrs. Greenacre acquiesced in a level Cumbrian word, and went back along the lake path to the lake house to set out the 4 o'clock tea. Miss Sally Baggett, at Mrs. Greenacre's settled arrangement, began on the same Monday as Eliza's reading class to attend in the South Library from 7 of an evening to 9, with her sewing basket at her chair by the second sash window, and a clean white linen cap upon her soft, fair hair. The arrangement was Mrs. Greenacre's. Miss Sally had a quick, frank air and an honest reading voice, and the South Library at evening wanted the gentle company of a second presence. Eliza, having considered the matter on the Sunday afternoon, gave her mild, equable consent. They read Mr. Wordsworth's lyrical ballads at the South Library writing table by the brass and china lamp, the pages turned at Eliza's hand, the harder words spoken first by Eliza and repeated after by Miss Sally in a careful Cumbrian voice. Mr. Wordsworth, Eliza remarked on the first evening, kept his house at Rydal Mount, but 7 miles north along the Lakeshore Road, and was at this season much seen at his garden in the morning hours. She had read his ballads in her schoolroom years at Kendal, and had thought them the most settled English verse of her time. Miss Sally took the Bog Violet poem and the old Cumberland Beggar poem most quickly to heart, and on the second Friday she had the lines by memory at the back of her mind as she set out the supper tray in the south parlour. Mrs. Greenacre, passing the South Library at 9:15 on the third evening with the household keys at her chatelaine, paused at the door and listened, Eliza's even reading voice at one cadence, Miss Sally's careful repetition at the next, and went up the back stair with a kind look upon her level, pale blue Cumbrian eyes. It became their settled hour. Eliza, who had not at the Kendall schoolroom owned a reading companion of her own age, found in Miss Sally's frank, attentive ear a freshness for the Wordsworth pages that her own 3 years of unaccompanied evenings had taught her to do without. The old Cumberland beggar in particular, Miss Sally read at the second sash window in a Cumbrian cadence that was almost the poet's own, having lived all her 22 years within a 4-mile compass of the lake shore. And Eliza, the candle at the writing table set even between them, listened to the verses as though she had not heard them before. On the Tuesday of the second week, Mrs. Greenacre brought in a plate of Mrs. Paul Well's Cumbrian shortbread at 8:30 and a pot of tea on the brass tray. Thereafter, the 8:30 tea became part of the South Library evening as the 7 o'clock opening of the book itself. So the first 3 weeks of March settled into their measured Cumbrian rhythm, the lake under the sash window passing from grey to dove, and at length to a pale, clear blue at the closing days of the month, the eastern fells stripping their snow at the Helvellyn Ridge, the cuckoo flower at the south wood edge breaking out in pale lilac on the Friday morning of the 18th. Then, on Wednesday the 22nd of March, 1820, Mrs. Greenacre brought up from the South Library cupboard a small lead-lined Sumatra teakwood box that Mr. Sotheran had asked be kept against his great-niece's coming. She set it upon the South Library writing table at 3 o'clock with a frank, attentive word. That Mr. Sotheran, in the early summer of 1819, when the long decline had begun, had brought the box down with his own hand from the east bedchamber cupboard, and had given it into her keeping, with the request that it be opened only by his great-niece, only at the lake house, only when she had settled to her own equable wish. Mrs. Greenacre had kept it these 9 months past at the housekeeper's cupboard at the bottom of the South Library back stair, and had thought, until this Wednesday afternoon, that the proper hour had not yet come. Eliza thanked her in a measured Cumbrian word, and waited until Mrs. Greenacre had withdrawn before she set her gloved hands at either side of the teakwood box. The lid was of dark Sumatran teak, the lead lining clean and well fitted, the hasp of plain brass, the slender brass key already in the lock. At 3:30, on the cool, clear, pale blue Wednesday afternoon of the 22nd of March, Eliza opened the lead-lined Sumatra teakwood box at the South Library writing table. The box held 4 things. Beneath the lid, wrapped in a square of dove-grey silk, lay a single cloth-bound volume of 187 pages in the Calcutta binder's hand, Mr. Sotheran's Sumatra manuscript memoir, in his careful Sotheran italic, written at the South Library writing table at the Lake House through the 4 years of his retirement from 1814 to 1818, the considered record of his shipwreck on the Coromandel coast in the spring monsoon of 1791, his Madras rescue, his Calcutta merchant house years under Mr. Bowness, whose plain name he had taken, his Canton silk trading years from 1801, and his Falmouth return in October 1812. Beneath the memoir, wrapped each in a separate square of Cantonese white silk, lay 3 Cantonese ivory miniatures, slight portraits, set in slender ivory ovals at 3 inches by 2, of her late grandfather, the Reverend Elijah Sotheran, of her late grandmother, Mrs. Martha Sotheran, and of her late father. The father shown at 5 years of age in the curate's house at Kirkland in 1773, soft pale hair, frank pale blue eyes, a child's mild mouth. Mr. Sotheran had had them painted from his own remembrance by a Canton ivory painter in 1795, and had kept them these 25 years. Beneath the miniatures, tied in a single bundle with a length of dove-grey ribbon, lay the full set of letters from her late father to Mr. Sotheran at Hawkshead. 39 in number, in chronological order from June 1813 to October 1816. The elder bundle of which she had already partly read in the East India chest in January, and at the bottom of the box, in a mahogany cabinet of 4 shallow drawers, lay 47 pressed Sumatran orchids that Mr. Sotheran had collected at Bencoolen and along the Padang coast in the years 1792 and 1793. Each in its own pale cream paper folder, each labelled in his careful italic with its Sumatran place name, the Linnaean binomial, the month and year of the gathering. Eliza sat at the writing table without moving for some little time. She unwrapped the 3 ivory miniatures and set them in a row before her. Her grandfather, her grandmother, her father at 5 years of age at the curate's house at Kirkland. 3 faces, 2 she had never seen and 1 she had not seen in this likeness, held these 25 years in dove-grey silk at the bottom of a Sumatran teak-wood box. She did not weep. She felt instead, at the writing table at 3:30 on the pale blue Wednesday afternoon, the level Westmoreland gravity of a young woman who has not, in her 3 years at the Kendall schoolroom, allowed herself to expect kindness from the past. She turned the manuscript memoir to its first page and read the considered opening. I, Adam Sotheran, lately of the Lake House at Hawkshead on Windermere, write these pages at the South Library writing table in the 71st year of my age, the 4th year of my retirement at this lake, against the day my great-niece Miss Eliza Sotheran of Kirkland in Westmoreland shall come into this house. She read the first 12 pages by the south sash window's last clear light, set a length of dove-grey ribbon at the place she had reached, and laid the memoir back into the lead-lined Sumatra box at 4 o'clock. She would read the rest at the writing table at 3:30 on each succeeding afternoon, she had resolved, until the memoir was through. Through the fortnight that followed, Eliza kept her appointment with the memoir at the writing table at 3:30. Mrs. Greenacre brought up the South Library tea at 4. Miss Sally Baggett came in at 7 for the Wordsworth reading. The household took the routine without remark. The memoir gave its considered account. The Coromandel wreck in the spring monsoon of 1791. The 8 days in the open fisher boat off the Madras coast. The kindness of the Madras coastal traders. The recovery at the Calcutta merchant house of Mr. Bowness. The assumption of the plain Bowness name. The Sumatran years 1791 to 1793 in the Padang trade, the return to Calcutta, the years in the company's silk room at Canton from 1801, the modest fortune by 1810, the homesickness, the Falmouth return in October 1812, the retreat to the lake at Hawkshead in the same year and month. It was a frank record, plain-spoken, written in the measured italic of a man who had not asked his own kin's company these 21 years past, and meant, in the 71st year of his age, to give an honest account of the matter to the one kinswoman to whom the account was owed. Eliza copied 3 pages of the memoir into her own cloth-bound commonplace book, the pages on the Sumatran orchid gathering at Bencoolen in the autumn of 1792, in which her great-uncle described the bog violet of the Padang slopes as the gentlest flower he had met in the Indies. She resolved, having considered the matter on the Sunday after the 2nd week of her reading, that at her own first London visit she would deposit the manuscript at the Royal Geographical Society at Somerset House, that the work might serve other men's understanding of the Sumatran coast, as her great-uncle had clearly intended. On Wednesday afternoon, the 12th of April, Eliza took tea at the rectory at Reverend Goodfellow's settled arrangement. Reverend Goodfellow, at his attentive book-room desk, his gold-rimmed spectacles pushed up his sandy grey hair, observed at the tea-table, at the considered moment when the rectory cat Jasper had settled itself upon the south sill. That Mr. Sotheran, in their last conversation at the lake house on the cool grey morning of the 10th of October, 1819, had asked that the memoir be brought to his Eliza, with his blessing and with his asking pardon, and that he, Reverend Goodfellow, had thought of these words on the Sunday past when Mrs. Greenacre had mentioned the box, the connection squared. Eliza thanked him in a level Cumbrian word, set down the rectory teacup at the saucer's centre, and looked once at the south sill, where Jasper had stretched out flat at the pale yellow April light. Reverend Goodfellow added, with the attentive blue-grey eyes lifted at hers, that Mr. Sotheran had spoken of her great-uncle's asking pardon as a thing he had wished done in his own absence, that he had no expectation of being forgiven in life, and had asked only that the box and its contents be placed at her hand and her judgment, on the day she should be settled enough to bear them. Eliza answered that she had borne them. She walked back along the lake path to the lake house at 5:15, with the kindness of the rectory afternoon held mild in her mind. Lady Day Quarter Day fell on the 25th of March, 1820. The first quarter day under Eliza's ownership. Mr. Furness brought the home pasture accounts to the South Library writing table at 10:30 on the Saturday morning. He stood by the second sash window in the moss-green shooting coat, the parchment receipt book under his arm, the kind weathered Cumbrian face mild at the attention of business. There were 3 rents to be received. Mr. Atkinson, home pasture tenant of the wooded south slope of 78 acres at the customary rate of £42 the year, paid his Lady Day quarter of £10 10 shillings in 5 gold sovereigns and the balance in Bank of England notes at the foot of the writing table. Mrs. Lee, at the Lakeshore Cottage, paid her quarter of £1 2 shillings 6 in Cumberland silver. Old Mr. Postlethwaite at the South Wood Edge Croft paid his quarter of 15 shillings in the same coin, and was given by Mr. Furness a kind level word at the south door. Eliza signed the Sotheran quarter-day account in firm italic at the foot of the page. Eliza Sotheran, Lake House, Hawkshead on Windermere, 25th of March, 1820. Set the seal at her signature with the Sotheran swan and reeds intaglio her great-uncle had left in the East India chest, and gave the receipt book back to Mr. Furness in the considered manner of a young mistress who has read her accounts and means her tenants to know it. Mr. Furness took his leave at 11:15 in a level word of acknowledgment. In the second week of April, on the Tuesday morning of the 11th, Mrs. Greenacre brought up from the housekeeper's cupboard at the bottom of the South Library, backstair a dove-grey velvet case lined in pale cream silk, the Sotheran Canton pearls. A parure of 2 rows of pearls of small worth, brought home from Canton by Mr. Sotheran in the East Indiaman Marquess of Salisbury in October 1810. Mr. Sotheran, Mrs. Greenacre observed in a level kind word, had asked that the pearls be given to his great-niece on the day she had settled to her own equable wish at the lake house, not in the first month and not in the second, but on whatever Tuesday of the spring she should walk down the South Library stair with a mistress's tread. Mrs. Greenacre had reckoned that day to be this one. Eliza accepted in mild, kind, Cumbrian gratitude. She set the velvet case upon the South Library writing table, lifted the 2 rows of pearls into the pale blue April light at the sash window, and laid them back. The pearls were of modest size, of an even cream rose colour, strung double on Cantonese silk, with a fine gold clasp wrought in the Canton fashion. They would serve, she had thought without speaking the thought, for the half morning of the late spring. She thanked Mrs. Greenacre by name, and Mrs. Greenacre, who had taken Mr. Sotheran's request these 9 months past as a household trust, acknowledged the thanks in a level kind word, and returned to the housekeeper's cupboard at the back stair. On the Wednesday afternoon of the 12th of April, after the rectory tea, the 6 girls of the reading class came up the lake path to the lake house at 5:15 at Bryony Atkinson's lead. They had with them wrapped in a square of pale cream calico tied with a length of dove-grey ribbon, a Lake District wildflower album that they had pressed and bound between two boards of dark slate paper through the Thursdays of Lent. Bryony Atkinson, the eldest, had done the binding at her father's home pasture workbench. The album held 21 pressed flowers of the wooded south slope and the lake shore, marsh marigold of the lower slope, cuckoo flower of the south wood edge, bog violet of the lake's western margin, the white wood anemone, the early lakeland primrose, the wild strawberry of the south croft. Each was labelled in the careful italic of Patience Tinker, the youngest, who had practised the labels at the rectory writing table on the past 3 Thursdays. Eliza accepted the album at the south porch in gracious, gentle Cumbrian gratitude, took each of the 6 girls by the hand in turn at the south porch step, and gave to each, from the cloth-bound shelf at the South Library, a cloth-bound Aesop of her great-uncle's private printing at Calcutta in 1808, 6 volumes from the same press, The Southern Swan and Reeds at the Spine. Bryony Atkinson took hers in a frank Cumbrian word of thanks. Patience Tinker took hers and looked at it for a long moment with her mild young mouth held even. The girls walked back along the lake path to the village at 6. Eliza stood at the south porch until they were past the lakeshore boatman's cottage, then went into the South Library, set the wildflower album upon the writing table, and opened it at the bog violet leaf. Through the latter half of April, Eliza began to walk the wooded south slope and the lake shore with Mr. Sotheran's pressed orchid cabinet upon the South Library writing table at the morning, and with a small cloth-bound Lake District botanical notebook of her own at the afternoon. She entered her own observations in firm italic at the cabinet's back leaves and at her own notebook in equal measure. The marsh marigold of the lower slope, gathered at the Tuesday morning the 18th, the cuckoo flower at the southward edge at the Wednesday morning the 19th, the bog violet at the lake's western margin at the Thursday morning the 20th. Mr. Furness, walking the wooded south slope with her on the Monday morning of the 17th, observed in a kind Cumbrian word that the bog violet of the western margin was the same flower her great-uncle had stopped to gather at every spring walk from 1813 to 1818. Eliza answered him in a level word, and made the entry in her notebook at the writing table that afternoon under his observation. In the 3rd week of April, by the parish convention at Hawkshead, Eliza's half-mourning was eased to half mourning. The dove-grey wool of her 4 months past was laid aside in the north wing cupboard, and from the Kendall trunk, Mrs. Greenacre brought up the fresh cream and fell blue sprigged muslin morning gown of her late mother Theodosia's, kept these 10 years past at the Kendall trunk, and now brought up to the lake. Mrs. Polwale had aired it at the kitchen hearth on the Saturday. Miss Sally Bagger had pressed it at the backstair board on the Monday morning. Mrs. Greenacre had set it out on the north wing chair on the Tuesday evening against the Easter Sunday morning. Easter Sunday fell that year on the 23rd of April. Eliza rose at 7:30 to a cool, clear, pale yellow morning at the sash window of her north wing chamber. The lake, the colour of pale blue Cumbrian silk, the eastern fells the colour of distant slate, the Helvellyn Ridge stripped clean of its snow at the upper crags. She dressed at the north wing chamber in the cream and fell blue sprigged muslin, pinned a sprig of early lakeland primrose at the bodice in the customary Hawkshead village fashion, laid the Sotheran Canton pearls at her throat in their 2 rows, and went down the back stair at 9:45. Mrs. Greenacre at the south porch in her Sunday dove-grey serge with the clean white lawn fichu. Miss Sally Baggett at the south door in her Sunday dark-grey print cotton with the clean white apron. Mr. Furness on the gravel sweep in his Sunday moss-green Cumbrian coat with the dark brown country hat in his hand. Mrs. Polwell on the kitchen step with her white linen cap and a kind warm word at the household's mourning. The four walked along the lake path to the village at 10. Eliza at the front with Mrs. Greenacre at her left and 3 paces behind, Mr. Furness at the rear, Miss Sally Baggett at the steward's right hand, and came up to the south aisle door of St. Michael's at 5 minutes to 11. The Southern pew at the south aisle had been kept for them these 6 Sundays past. The cushion was a clean dove-grey wool with the Southern swan and reeds at the corner. The prayer book at the rail was the late Mr. Southern's own. Reverend Goodfellow read the Easter service in his attentive Cumbrian cadence. The village was in its full Easter dress. Bryony Atkinson at the rectory pew in pale yellow muslin, Patience Tinker at her mother's side in cream and blue, Mr. Atkinson of the home pasture at his Sunday dark coat, Mrs. Lee of the Lakeshore cottage at her clean dove-grey serge, old Mr. Postlethwaite of the South Croft at his Sunday best, Mrs. Polwale's sister at the North Aisle in her Sunday cream. The Easter lily at the chancel rail, the south porch open to the pale yellow Cumbrian morning, the Helvellyn, fells visible through the south porch arch. At 12, the service closed. Eliza came out at the south porch with Mrs. Greenacre, 3 paces behind. Reverend Goodfellow at the porch step in his clean white linen surplice gave the customary Easter blessing to each of his Southern party in turn. Eliza first, Mrs. Greenacre second, Mr. Furness third, Miss Sally Baggett fourth, and was about to walk Eliza down to the Lich Gate when a country gentleman whom Eliza had not seen at any service these 6 Sundays past stepped from the south porch shadow at a level Cumbrian pace, removed his dark brown country hat in his right hand, and inclined deeply at her, and at Reverend Goodfellow. He was tall, lean, 6'1" upright. The dark brown hair was cut close at the nape, with 1 streak of pure silver at the right temple. The frank pale green eyes were the colour of Windermere at noon. The mouth was mild and firm, the skin weathered fair Cumbrian from years at the lake and the fell. The croft, baronial signet, a swan over 3 reeds at a chaste goldfield, was at the 3rd finger of his right hand. He wore a plain, dark brown country morning coat over a fawn waistcoat, his Sunday cravat of clean white linen, his Sunday breeches of dark brown country wool, his Sunday riding boots polished to a mild gleam. Reverend Goodfellow turned at the porch with a kind, mild Cumbrian gravity at his attentive blue-grey eyes, and made the introduction in the considered Hawkshead manner. Miss Southern, Sir Crispin Croft, 8th Baronet Croft of Croft Hall at Bowness across the lake. Sir Crispin is the patron of the Hawkshead living and the considered improver of the Bowness Parish School these 8 years past. Eliza inclined at the south porch step in mild, firm, gracious composure. Sir Crispin inclined deeper, and when he had come up again, he spoke in a frank Cumbrian voice at his home water. Miss Southern, I had known your late great-uncle Mr. Southern in his last 7 years at the lake. He was the considered improver of the Hawkshead Parish School, North Windows, in the spring of 1815, and again at the autumn of 1818, and I had had the kindness of his correspondence in the parish school matter at Bowness in the same years. I was moved at the November bereavement. I have not been at the Hawkshead Sunday service since the November funeral at Reverend Goodfellow's reading. I have come over from Bowness this Easter Sunday, by my late wife, Lady Cecilia's 3-year mourning, being eased to half-mourning at my daughter Frances's settled wish, and I had thought it becoming to call at St. Michael's before I called at the lake house. He had said the whole at a level Cumbrian pace, the frank, pale green eyes held at hers in honest, attentive kindness, the dark brown country hat at his right hand against the front of his fawn waistcoat. Reverend Goodfellow at his elbow, with a mild, attentive look. Mrs. Greenacre 3 paces behind at the south porch wall in a clean dove-grey Sunday serge. Eliza answered him in a frank, mild Cumbrian voice that was her own. Sir Crispin, I am moved by your kindness in coming over. My great-uncle had spoken of your parish school matter at Bowness. to Mrs. Greenacre at the South Library in the spring of 1818, and Reverend Goodfellow mentioned your patronage of the Hawkshead living at the rectory tea on the Wednesday past. I had not known the face. I shall not forget the kindness. Sir Crispin inclined a third time, mild and firm. Reverend Goodfellow walked them down the south porch path to the Lich Gate at a level Cumbrian pace. At the Lich Gate, Sir Crispin took his leave at 20 past noon, gave his frank kind word to Reverend Goodfellow at the rectory side and to Eliza at the lake path side, and walked east along the village road to the Bonus Ferry at Ferry Nab, where his groom waited with the dark bay riding horse. Reverend Goodfellow stood at the Lich Gate with Eliza for a moment, in the mild Cumbrian noon. He observed in a level kind word that Sir Crispin had been a frank, attentive friend to the Hawkshead Parish School these 8 years past, that the Croft Hall household had been 3 years at half-mourning for the late Lady Cecilia, that the Honourable Frances Croft was 9 years of age and had read the entire Edgeworth Frank at her father's South Library through the past winter, and that Reverend Goodfellow would think it becoming if Eliza were to receive a Croft Hall call at the South Library when the call should be paid. Eliza answered in a frank level word. She and Mrs. Greenacre walked back along the lake path to the lake house at 1:45, Mr. Furness and Miss Sally Baggett at the rear, the cool, clear, pale yellow Cumbrian Easter Sunday afternoon at their faces and the lake at their left hand. At the south porch at 12:30, Eliza paused on the step before she went in. She looked east across Windermere to the fells, to the Helvellyn Ridge, clear of its snow at the upper crags, to the Loughrigg slope, dark with the late April rain, to the pale grey water of the lake in the noon light. And she was sensible, at the south porch step in the cream and fell blue sprigged muslin and the early lakeland primrose at the bodice and the 2 rows of Southern Canton pearls at her throat, of an alteration in her own life that she would not yet attempt to name. Mrs. Greenacre at her elbow, in a level kind Cumbrian word, that the Sunday roast was at the kitchen hearth at 1, that Mrs. Polwheel had laid the south parlour table with the late Mr. Sotheron's Easter linen, that Mr. Furness and Miss Sally Baggett would take their Sunday dinner at the kitchen at the same hour. Eliza answered in a mild, firm word of thanks. She went into the South Hall at 12:30, laid the dark brown straw bonnet upon the hall settle, and gave Mrs. Greenacre her gloves to lay upon the sideboard. The household resumed at its accustomed Sunday hour. Mrs. Polwhale set the south parlour dinner at 1. The 4 sat at the parlour table at the late Mr. Sotheron's Easter linen. The brass clock at the hall struck the quarters at its even Cumbrian pace. The cool, clear, pale yellow Cumbrian Easter Sunday afternoon closed at the south porch in a kind, mild Lake District equanimity that Eliza Sotheron of the Lake House at Hawkshead on Windermere, late of the Kendal Reading School, lately come into the Southern inheritance by her great-uncle's holograph will of the 14th of September, 1819, would carry with her at the South Library writing table through the level Cumbrian afternoon and into the gentle Cumbrian evening of her first Easter at the lake. Saturday the 6th of May, 1820, at 3 o'clock, came in over the western fells with a thin, warm, pale gold light at the south face of the lake house. Eliza had given Mrs. Greenacre her settled instructions at 2:30, tea at 3:30, the Sumatran orchid catalogue at the South Library writing table, the green baize cloth turned down at the second sash window for Miss Baggett's needlework. The Cream Lake District honeysuckle was not yet at full bloom on the south wall, but the first knots of bud were showing at the trellis eaves above the south parlour window. At 3:10, the small Croft brougham came up the carriage drive. Mr. Furness was at the south door before the wheels had stopped. Sir Crispin handed down first his sister and then his sister's husband. The three of them came up the gravel together in the equable Cumbrian afternoon. Mrs. Tabitha Wentworth, 35, the elder sister, lately come up from Penrith for the Easter fortnight at Croft Hall, was a slender 5'6" in dove-grey silk morning gown, with a white lace fichu, her dark brown hair pinned smooth beneath a fine lace cap, her pale green eyes attentive and her mouth kind, the same Croft pale green eye as her brother. Beside her, Mr. Hubert Wentworth, 42, sturdy at 5'10" in a moss-green country coat, soft mid-brown hair, frank blue-grey eyes, open, kind face, gave Mr. Furness a gentle word and inclined at the south porch as Mrs. Greenacre opened the door. Mrs. Greenacre received them at the south library. The coal had been freshly settled in the grate. Miss Sally Bagot was at the second sash window with her sewing 3 paces off. The Sumatran orchid catalogue lay open at the writing table. Eliza rose at the south door in her dove-grey wool, half mourning with the white linen collar, and inclined. Mrs. Wentworth, Mr. Wentworth, I am moved by your kindness in coming over. Mrs. Wentworth crossed the room in the gracious way of a Cumberland country lady and took Eliza's gloved hands in her own. Miss Sotheran, I had hoped to make your acquaintance these 3 months past. My brother has spoken of your late uncle with the warmest regard, and of your settling here at the lake house with the warmest goodwill. She seated herself at the green leather chair beside the south sash window. Mr. Wentworth took the upright country chair at her right, Sir Crispin the second leather chair at Eliza's left. Mrs. Greenacre withdrew to her sewing at the housekeeper's chair by the fire screen. Tea came in at 3:30 in the considered Cumbrian way. Sir Crispin spoke first in his frank Cumbrian voice. He had known Mr. Sotheran, under the simple name of Mr. Bowness, these 7 years and 1 month past, since he had come over to Hawkshead in October 1812 to call at the new tenant of the lake house at his late father's settled instructions. He had been the standing improver of the Hawkshead Parish School these 8 years. He had subscribed with Mr. Sotheran to the North Window Fund at the parish school in 1814 and again in 1817. He had not, in his 7 years' acquaintance, known anything of Mr. Sotheran's true Sotheran identity, or of his East India past, or of the elder brother's curacy at Kirkland, or of the niece teaching at Kendal. The Reverend Goodfellow had kept faith with the late gentleman's settled wish, and Sir Crispin, on his honour, had never asked. I had taken him, Sir Crispin said, gentle-voiced, for a retired Calcutta gentleman of the Bowness name, of considered habits and gracious goodwill, who had asked only that his retirement be undisturbed. I did not press him. I am sorry now that I did not press him, only because I might have had the pleasure of your acquaintance the sooner. Eliza inclined at the writing table, in the equable way she had brought down from Kendal. Sir Crispin, my uncle was answered in your kindness, as I am answered now. Mrs. Wentworth set down her cup. She had been at Croft Hall in November 1819, at her father's last illness. The 7th baronet had been 6 weeks at his bed. She had been called up from Penrith in the 2nd week. Mr. Sotheran had come over from Hawkshead on the Wednesday morning of the 10th of November by the small ferry and a hired Bowness gig, at her late father's settled request. He had sat half an hour at the bedside. The conversation had been gracious and considered. Her father had said afterwards that Mr. Bowness was the kindest neighbour the Croft Hall side of Windermere had known these 40 years. I am moved by the hearing of it, Eliza said. The tea hour passed in the gentle, even rhythm of a Cumbrian afternoon. Mr. Wentworth spoke of the Penrith side. Mrs. Wentworth spoke of Francis. Sir Crispin spoke of the parish school. At 4:20, Mr. Furness brought round the brougham. At the south door, Mrs. Wentworth took Eliza's hands again. Miss Sotheran, I should be obliged if you would come over to Croft Hall in the next fortnight at our settled fortnight here. Hubert and I are off to Penrith again at the end of May, and I should not like to go without having sat an hour with you at the south parlour of my brother's house." Eliza acquiesced in the gracious way of a Westmoreland gentlewoman. Through May and June, the Tuesday calls began. Sir Crispin rode over from Bowness by the small ferry at noon. He was at the South Library writing table at 1 o'clock. The hour ran to 2 by Mrs. Greenacre's clock at the south sash window. Mrs. Greenacre at her sewing chair, Miss Sally Bagger at the second sash window with her hemwork. They read together, the gentleman and the schoolmistress, from Mr. Wordsworth's Lyrical Ballads, the Cumbrian poet at Rydal, whose verses Eliza had known from her Kendal schoolroom, and from the Sumatran Orchid Catalogue, page by page, in the considered Cumbrian rhythm of a reading hour. The first Tuesday, the 9th of May, Sir Crispin came in a moss-green country morning coat over fawn waistcoat, the Croft baronial signet, a swan over 3 reeds, on his right hand. He sat at the second leather chair. He read aloud the Cowper Bog Violet passage at Eliza's settled choice. He was frank in voice, gentle in manner, weathered in the face from his Bowness fell rides. The one streak of pure silver at his right temple caught the south light. The second Tuesday, the 16th of May, they read the Orchid Catalogue. He observed in a considered way that his daughter Frances had taken an interest in the pressings. Frances had been at Bowness at her aunt's lap that fortnight. She had asked him on the Sunday at supper whether she might be brought over to see the small wooded slope. The third Tuesday, the 23rd, they read Mr. Wordsworth's Tintern lines. Sir Crispin observed mildly that he had not been at Tintern, but he had been at the Y in his 23rd year. Eliza answered in the level way she had brought down from her father's curacy that she had not been south of Lancaster. Mrs. Greenacre, at her sewing, did not look up. The Wednesday afternoon walks ran alongside the Tuesday calls. Sir Crispin came over by the small ferry at 3 o'clock at the close of the parish reading class. He met Eliza at the south porch. They walked the small wooded slope of oak and ash for the half-hour, Mrs. Greenacre 2 paces behind them at the lake path. They spoke of the Southern orchid pressings of 1792. The 47 Sumatran pressings Mr. Southern had carried home from the Bay of Bengal in 1812. They spoke of Mr. Wordsworth's Bog Violet poem. They spoke of Frances's lessons at the Bowness Rectory. The Honourable Frances Croft was at her Latin under the Bowness curate's careful tuition these 3 years past, a thoughtful girl who had asked her father whether she might learn the Greek next. The Cumbrian May closed warm and pale gold over the western fells. The honeysuckle came at the south wall in the first week of June. The east bedchamber that had been Mr. Southern's was kept closed at Mrs. Greenacre's settled habit. On the Wednesday afternoon of the 28th of June, at the close of the half-hour walk, at the south porch, Sir Crispin asked the question in the frank Cumbrian voice he had brought down to all of these afternoons. "Miss Southern, I have come to the asking of a further indulgence. I should be obliged if you would be at home to me at the south parlour on the Saturday afternoons through July, at the customary chaperonage. 3 to 5. I shall not press you in any other matter at those hours. I ask only the further hour of your acquaintance." Eliza answered in mild, firm, equable composure at the south porch. "Sir Crispin, I shall be at home." The July Saturday calls came in at the south parlour. The Cream Lake District honeysuckle was at full bloom on the south wall by the second week. Miss Sally Baggett at 3 paces at the second sash window with her sewing, Mrs. Greenacre at the South Library writing table at her quarter-day accounts, 3 to 5 by the parlour clock. They walked the small wooded slope at the close of each call, the western fells at the lake, the considered Cumbrian hour going down to 4. Saturday, the 5th of August, 1820 came in at 3 o'clock at the south parlour. The honeysuckle was at the full second flush. Eliza was at the upright country chair beside the south sash window in her dove-grey wool, half mourning with the clean white linen collar. Sir Crispin was shown in by Mr. Furness at 3 o'clock to the chime. Miss Sally Baggett at the second sash window at 3 paces. Sir Crispin set down on the small side table the green leather commonplace book of his late father, the 7th Baronet. He crossed the south parlour hearthrug. He knelt at her level at the upright country chair. He took the green leather book in his right hand. He spoke in the frank, mild, considered Croft voice. Miss Sotheron. I had not, when my late father first knew Mr. Sotheron in the autumn of 1812, foreseen this hour. I had been 3 years a widower, and had not looked to be otherwise. I have loved you, with what dignity I could, and with what considered patience the 4 months have required, since the south porch of St. Michael's on Easter Sunday the 23rd of April. I ask you now, on no other ground than that I have loved you firmly through the spring and the summer, to do me the honour of becoming Lady Croft and the mistress of Croft Hall. You have known me too short a time to be in love with me yet. I shall not press you on that. I ask only that you consider the question at your own time, and answer me upon your own terms. If your answer is no, my Tuesday and Wednesday and Saturday calls shall continue undiminished, while you shall suffer them, and the question shall never be raised again. That is my asking. Eliza had set her gloved hands at the arms of the upright country chair. She answered in mild, firm, gracious composure at his level on the hearthrug. Sir Crispin, I shall. He bowed his head once at her hands. Miss Sally Baggett at the second sash window did not look up from her sewing. The south parlour clock at the mantel went on at its even Cumbrian rhythm. The banns were called at St. Michael's at Hawkshead by Reverend Goodfellow, and at St. Martin's at Bowness by the Bowness Curate, on the Sundays of the 13th, the 20th, and the 27th of August, 1820. There were no impediments offered at either parish. Saturday morning, the 9th of September, 1820, came in warm and pale gold over Windermere at 6. The honeysuckle at the south wall was at the late flush. Mrs. Atkinson, the village dressmaker, had brought up the cream Cumbrian muslin morning gown on the Thursday evening. Mrs. Greenacre had laid it across the dressing chair at the north wing chamber on the Friday night. At 9 o'clock, Eliza was dressed at the north wing chamber by Miss Sally Baggett. The cream Cumbrian muslin morning gown, made by Mrs. Atkinson at the customary Hawkshead village fashion, a sprig of late summer Lakeland honeysuckle, cut by Mr. Furness at 8:30, pinned at the bodice. The Sotheron Canton pearls, 2 rows of pearls of small worth, brought back by Mr. Sotheron from Canton in 1810, at the throat. Long ivory silk gloves to the elbow. Her late mother Theodosia's small jet locket, Theodosia Sotheron née Greystoke, gone these 10 years past at 32, worn beneath the bodice in gentle filial remembrance. At 10 o'clock at St. Michael's at Hawkshead on Windermere, by Reverend Goodfellow, in the gentle Cumbrian autumn sun coming through the south windows, Eliza Sotheron was married to Sir Crispin Croft, 8th Baronet Croft of Croft Hall in the parish of Bowness on Windermere. Mr. Thirkell, 58, in his plain black superfine, his attentive grey eyes behind the small gold-rimmed spectacles, gave the bride away, her father Reverend John Sotheron being gone these 4 years past. Miss Sally Baggett stood as matron of honour at the chancel step in dark grey print cotton with a white apron clean from the press. Mrs. Tabitha Wentworth sat at the front pew with the Honourable Frances Croft on her lap. Frances in her pale blue and cream-sprigged muslin morning frock, her soft chestnut hair plaited in 2 braids tied with fell blue ribbons, her frank, pale green eyes very direct, her kind mouth at her aunt's shoulder. Mr. Hubert Wentworth at the same pew in his moss-green fell coat, the Hawkshead parish, the 6 girls of the reading class, the Reverend Goodfellow's housekeeper, Mr. Furness's wife and 2 sons, at the back pews on the south side. The Croft Hall household, the butler, the steward, the cook, the 4 maids, at the back pews on the north side. Reverend Goodfellow read the service in his attentive Cumbrian voice. Eliza answered her vows at the level of a parish schoolmistress at her settled work. Sir Crispin answered his at the frank, weathered level he had brought down to all of these months. The ring was Lady Cecilia's mother's, a small, thin band of Cumbrian gold his late wife had given over to him at her last week in 1815 against the chance that he should marry again, with her gentle blessing. The wedding breakfast went forward at the lake house at Eliza's settled wish. Croft Hall was to be her new home, and the small brougham was at the south carriage drive at 1 o'clock, but the breakfast of the morning belonged at the lake house. Mrs. Polwell had been at the kitchen since 4. The south dining room was set for 14. There was a cold, dressed Windermere char from the lake, the Hawkshead market poultry, a Cumberland ham from Mr. Furness's curing house, the early September pears from the south wall, a Bowness honey cake at Mrs. Polwell's settled receipt, and the Croft Hall claret Sir Crispin had sent over at the Friday morning. Mr. Thirkell gave the considered toast to the new Lady Croft in the level Kendal manner. Mrs. Tabitha Wentworth answered it. Frances Croft, at her aunt's right hand at the pale blue and cream sprigged muslin, kept her eyes very direct at her new stepmother across the table. Mr. Furness continued at the home pasture. Mrs. Greenacre continued at the housekeeper's keys at the lake house. The quarter-day audit went forward in October at Mr. Thirkell's hand at the South Library writing table. The lake house was let to the new curate of St. Michael's by Lady Croft's settled arrangement at the customary parish rate. Croft Hall received its new mistress in the autumn. Frances Croft took to her stepmother in the frank, considered Cumbrian way of a 9-year-old Westmoreland girl of the fells. Mr. Sotheran's Sumatran orchid cabinet was set above the South Library writing table at Croft Hall. Outside, the Cumbrian sky turned the colour of slate after rain. There are stories that begin with a kiss. There are stories that begin with a vow. There are stories that begin with a knock at a country door, and stories that begin with a hired post-chaise on a winter road, and stories that begin with a will or a parish ledger or a curate's letter brought up on the Morning Post. And there are, measured in the asking, longer in the considering, of the most considered patience in the answering, stories that begin with a Cumbrian gentleman's holograph will, written by his own hand at a lake house at Hawkshead on Windermere, on a Tuesday in September, 1819, 2 months before his death of a long decline, read aloud at a Kendal solicitor's chambers at Strickland Gate by an attentive Cumbrian solicitor at 10:30 on the cool, clear, pale blue Saturday morning of the 8th of January, 1820, to a young schoolmistress of 28, who had believed her great-uncle dead these 28 years past on the foundering of the East Indiaman Brunswick off the Coromandel coast in the spring monsoon of 1791. Who had heard read aloud in the will the lake house at Hawkshead, with the wooded south slope of 78 acres and the £6,800 in the 3% at the Bank of England, who had travelled north by hired post-chaise on the Saturday of the 15th of January, and been received at the south door of the lake house by Mrs. Greenacre at the housekeeper's keys, who had sat in mild, firm, equable composure on the Wednesday of the 16th of February at the South Parlour, and heard out Mr. Ezekiel Strangeways, the Liverpool cotton broker, and sent him at 20 past noon to a temperate journey back to Liverpool, who had opened on the Wednesday of the 22nd of March the lead-lined Sumatra teakwood box and read her great-uncle's manuscript memoir of 187 pages over the fortnight, who had been introduced at the south porch of St. Michael's on Easter Sunday, the 23rd of April, to Sir Crispin Croft, 8th Baronet Croft of Croft Hall, at Bowness across the lake, who had heard out his asking on the Saturday of the 5th of August at the South Parlour at the upright country chair, and answered him at his level on the hearthrug, and who had been married to him at 10 o'clock at St. Michael's at Hawkshead by Reverend Goodfellow on the Saturday morning of the 9th of September, 1820, with Mr. Thirkell of Kendal giving her away, and Mrs. Greenacre at the housekeeper's keys at the Lake House in the considered Cumbrian way of a gentlewoman who had served the Sotheran name these 7 years past. And so, on the warm pale gold Saturday morning of the 9th of September, 1820, in the parish church of St. Michael at Hawkshead on Windermere, in the county of Westmoreland, under the gentle Cumbrian autumn sun, Eliza Croft, née Sotheran, who had sat in mild, firm, equable composure at Mr. Thirkell's leather chair at Kendal on the 8th of January, and heard read aloud the holograph will of the great-uncle she had believed dead these 28 years, closed the small brass key of the East India chest into Mrs. Greenacre's keeping at the south porch of the Lake House, and crossed Windermere by the small ferry to Croft Hall.